There it is. Bully Ben for being Protestant. I
Welcome.
hereby bully you.
Oh, thank you.
I gotta tell you, the age of bullies is gone, man.
Yeah, I
I
know.
teach high school, and bullies are out. I had a kid actually in class.
Sir, I will remind you that we're streaming now.
Yeah,
So,
you talked over his welcome.
yes. Uh, but I didn't want you to mention anything that might be used against us in a court of social law, because we are outlaws, or at least we would be if the world and Satan had his way. But for tonight, I am trapped in a specially made torment nexus with three erudite Catholics. And as we stream to be noticed by Matt Fradd of Pints with Aquinas, a great show, a wonderful show, we will walk our way through art, through literature, and joining us, literature indeed, is Father Augustine Wetta, a friend of the show, who has been on before to talk about a couple of subjects, but for me, most notably, the Eighth Arrow, and a book of the wisdom of the Desert Fathers. It is no compromise or denial for a Protestant to read the Church Fathers, and I do appreciate all work that is done on them. And of course, we are joined by the legendary, the living Grandmaster John C. Wright, who is working diligently on a new series, which I will pester him about as a fan. For they are not just, for I am not just trapped with them in a torment nexus, they are also trapped with me. And of course, I'm joined with Anthony Marquetta, co host. How are you gentlemen doing?
Very well. Until you told me this was a tournament nexus, I was doing much better. But now I'm on my guard.
Oh, it's for me.
I,
Don't worry.
You explicitly said it was mutual. As it's meted unto you, so it will be meted back to you.
Yes.
I believe that's the rule.
I like to say I put the rude in erudite.
When you do it, Father, I consider it to be a holy rude.
All right. So first topic for today, we'll be discussing how the Pope's dissertation on the Assumption of Mary, as seen in the Deuterocanonical books. Father Wetta, you have the floor. Please tell us how 2 Maccabees teaches the Assumption of Mary very clearly. I'm sorry, this was a joke between Ben and I.
I was
Ben has a
born. I
thing
was.
about it needs to be
I was
everything needs to be in sola scriptura, and certainly not in the Deuterocanon. The Assumption of Mary is what you might call a bugaboo, if to
Yeah,
use a
that's-
phrase.
hmm.
Go ahead.
Well, Anthony, you've killed the momentum of the show, so I think we should
Oh
just
no.
we'll rack this up as a failure and try
It was
again.
a good joke in my head, and then nobody followed up on it, and I'm like, darn, I've killed the show. That's okay. I've done worse moment, so I think we're good there. We'll move on to the next thing, which actually is fairly meaty. And I know, Mr. Wright, I know your story because you're very public about it, have told it multiple times, but it is an extremely entertaining story, I will say. And not everybody who has heard this show perhaps has heard your story. So why don't you tell us? We'll get started with yours. Your faith journey. How did you become Catholic? I know you started out from atheist.
How did I become Christian, or how did I become Catholic? Because
Let's start
it's
from
two different
atheism
issues.
to Catholicism.
You, I was my conversion was in 2 parts: a supernatural part and a natural part. I have always been an atheist, and not just an atheist, but a vehement, vituperative, crusading atheist who went out of my way to find Christians and try to talk them out of believing in God. And I'm ashamed to say that I was successful in at least 3 cases, and pleased to say that in 2 of those 3 cases, the person later snapped back into their senses and returned to the church. But I was an adherent of the Roman philosophy of Stoicism, which I thought was the best way to live. Because if you're trapped in a universe without any sort of God, you either have to decide to be a hedonist and live for pleasure, or a disciplined man who lives for duty. And I chose the latter. But at the same time, without God, I adopted a libertarian, libertine view of life where it was lawful and licit to do anything that the law of man permitted one to do. So to me, things like homosexuality and contraception were not unlawful, were not illicit. Then I fell into a conversation with some Christian friends of mine, and I swear to you they were Christian, who told me that sex outside of marriage was licit. And I said, not in your religion, it's not. And they both argued with me. And I began to realize that my own belief, my own libertarian beliefs, and my stoical beliefs could not be reconciled. I could not think that homosexuality was licit if at the same time I thought that a man should control his emotions and live according to nature. You see? And so I was talking with my Christian friend, and I was asking him what meaning sex had for him, because I was a romantic, and despite that I was an atheist. I believe in true love. And I was trying to shock him during the conversation, and I asked him, do you think sex is just an entertainment like mixed doubles tennis, where you just need to have two sexes to to entertain yourself? It's just for pleasure. And instead he shocked me by answering yes. And I stared at the empty sky, because I didn't believe in God, so to me there's nothing in heaven. And I said, dear empty sky, who in the world has robbed my friend of everything romantic in life? Every love story, every love song, Mickey and Minnie Mouse, Jove and Juno, Romeo and Juliet, Lancelot and Guinevere, everything, every romantic story ever told, okay, means nothing to my friend because he thinks sex is meaningless. How could that happen? And my sense of logic answered back, contraception made it happen. And I said, sense of logic, are you kidding me? Contraception is the greatest thing since sliced bread. It allows us to have an orgy that has no consequences for sex, that has no meaning. And my sense of logic said, are you sure something in nature can have no meaning? Are you sure meaning is something humans invent rather than discover? I don't know if I drove the father away by my talking about these lurid subjects. And so I realized that the Catholic Church was correct. It was the only one who agreed with me that sex had a meaning. It was for reproduction and for the unity of man and wife, that it was morally illicit not to make prudent provision for the young, that sexual reproduction was sexual reproduction, and that sex was sex, whereas everyone in the modern day told me sex was not sex, that sex was the externals of the act of sexual reproduction, was the pleasure of it, not the thing itself. So that baffled me. So I began to wonder why all my atheist friends were crazy on this topic and on every other major topic, whereas my hated enemies, the Christians, were correct on every major topic. And I couldn't figure that out. I said, how can the Catholic Church be correct about contraception, about abortion, about homosexuality, and incorrect about whether or not there's a sky father, there's a Santa Claus in the sky called God? So I began reading C.S. Lewis and G.K. Chesterton, who are subtle advocates for your position. And I began reading Thomas Aquinas, and he's very logical, and I read him in college, so I knew he was a paragon of logic, but I didn't realize how difficult he was, even for a philosopher like me, to get through. And so I said to myself, this can't be right. This cannot be that if there's a real God and he really wants me to be saved and he's really benevolent, he cannot expect me to work my way through a 900-page volume written in extremely dense and difficult to understand technical material to grasp whether or not he exists. There's got to be some obvious way. Oh, if only God was wise enough to have put some way in the human heart where God's presence would be evident to anyone who had faith, but clearly that's not the case. So I said, okay, I'm up for it now. I have a contradiction in my philosophy, and I realized at that time that my entire atheist philosophy was arguing in a circle. Because the other thing I didn't mention is during that same conversation, my friend asked me, if God Almighty appeared in front of you and told you that homosexuality was okay, because I was arguing that it wasn't. I was arguing it was against nature. Would you think it was okay? And I said, well, if I saw God appear in front of me, I would think it was hallucination. And at that point, I realized I had just stumbled into a pit, because I was saying to him that I based all my beliefs on reason and evidence, and that I would reject evidence and reason of God without evidence. So I realized I was arguing in a circle. I was starting from the premise that God doesn't exist and coming to the conclusion that God doesn't exist. Now, this truly offended my pride as a philosopher, and I said, okay, that can't be. So I looked left and I looked right, and I made sure that none of my atheist friends were anywhere in eyesight. I got down on my knees and I folded my hands and I said, "Dear God," I didn't know how to pray because I thought it was like a letter. I said, "I'm an atheist. I know that you don't exist. I can prove you don't exist with the logical clarity of a proof of Euclid, of a geometry proof. But as a philosopher, I must admit that it's possible, theoretically possible, that I'm wrong. So if there is a way that you can prove to me that you exist in a fashion that I will find understandable and legitimate, please do so. And if not, then you're no God. Then, to heck with you. Thanking you in advance for your cooperation, signing off, John Wright." The next day, I had a heart attack. I was dying. I went to my wife and I said, either call an ambulance or call a Christian Science practitioner. She's a Christian Scientist. They have a healing ministry. The practitioner gets on the phone and says a prayer for me, and the heart attack stops like that, instantaneously. I said, that seems like an interesting coincidence. How could that be? How could prayer actually solve things? That can't happen in the universe I live in. How is this possible? I went to the hospital to find out what had been wrong with me, because at that time I was feeling perfectly healthy. They said, "John, you have 5 blocked arteries." I said, 5 blocked arteries? I didn't even know the human heart had 5 arteries. They said, "We're going to have to, take out your heart and replace it with a chicken or something. Just, fool around with it." I said, okay. So I said, I'm going to try praying again, because I think I just saw a miracle, but that miracles don't exist. So then the Holy Spirit came into me, like wine being poured into a dirty cup. One moment I was normal me. The next moment I was aware of my own soul. That the sense of truth and logic that I've always followed my whole life as a philosopher turned and looked at me. It was alive. I could see it in my mind. It was a living thing. It was a divine thing. And I felt it enter my soul, enter my body, like it was like being filled up, like being filled up, as I said, with wine. And it wasn't as if God came to me and presented evidence like in a court of law and then asked me for judgment. It was more as if I was a character in a story and he just changed the story around me so that I was aware of things of my own soul, my own immortality, my own being in ways that had not previously been done. This was merely the first of several things. Later on, I had a vision. I had a visitation from the Virgin Mary and from Christ himself and from God Almighty. And I saw all 3 persons of the Trinity, and I, about a month after that, I had a religious experience where I was taken outside of time and shown the structure of how prophecy and time works, and the ancient philosophical question of how free will is reconcilable with predetermination was made clear to me. Now, these are not the kind of things that normally accompany hallucinations. I have an in-law who unfortunately suffers from dementia, and I know what the symptoms are, and I did not have any of the symptoms. So I sat down. Oh, and one of the things that Christ said to me, and Christ, I should say, scared the bejesus out of me. He says, "God judges no man, but I will be your judge at the end of time." Now, at that time, when I saw that vision, I said to myself, well, that can't be right. All Christians know that God is very judgmental. Look at the flood of Noah. This clearly is something I'm making up out of my own head. I don't have to believe it. It's not real. But I did decide to read the Bible after that, because I was visited by visitations and miracles and a religious experience, which are 3 different things, 3 different types of proof. And should I just mention that my prayer, even though it was given sarcastically, was answered, and more than abundantly? So I'm reading in the Bible, and in the book of John, there it is, a line, almost word for word. I think I got one word wrong, where Christ says, "God judges no man. Christ will be the judge." And I said, that's really interesting. Either I read that line when I was young, when I was an atheist who never read the Bible, and I read it in the Bible, or maybe I read it in school. I made myself forget it. I then induced a heart attack in myself, produced a miracle in myself based on my faith in a religion I didn't have faith in when I heard a guy praying for me. Then I induced a vision in myself by means of my hallucination, my ability to create hallucinations at will. And during the hallucination, I summoned up this buried memory and stuck it into my head to convince myself to believe in Christianity. Now, that only requires 9 different violations of the Occam's razor, where I have to assume entities not present. The other option, the other theory, is that Christ, who talked to John when he wrote the book, said the same thing to him as he said to me when he saw me. Which of the 2 theories is simpler and requires fewer assumptions? So that was how I became Christian. The way I became a Catholic was unfortunately not as supernatural. I was like a guy on death row who suddenly found out that his father was the governor who had pardoned him, because I found out I was immortal instead of mortal. I wasn't going to die and turn into worm food, which is what atheist things happen when you die. So I'm like a kid who rushes out to the road to find out the orphan finds out his father and mother are still alive, and I go, yay! And imagine if the father and mother said, by the way, we've had a divorce while you were lost, and father lives this way and mother lives this way. You have to pick which of the 2 houses to go to. And I went, I have to pick. I thought you Christians were all about love and unity. How come you guys quarreled? Okay. I'm so cheesed off at you Christians. I'm sorry. It still makes me angry. So then I said, okay, I'm a lawyer, but I can't relitigate the Council of Trent. I don't know enough about religion to make a decision. I will just go through a logical process of reasoning and see what the claims are being made by both sides and see if I can weigh them. Well, I found out to my surprise that the claims made by the Catholics is a different claim fundamentally than the claims made by the Protestants in terms of where the church came from, where the Bible came from, and where the authority comes from. And the Protestants, in order for the Protestants to be correct, the church had to be correct at a certain date. The early church has to be correct in order for the Protestants to be correct to rebel against it, right? But the cutoff date, if you're going to reject the structure, the episcopal structure of bishops, if you're going to reject veneration to Mary, is before the canonicity of Scripture was decided upon in the 5th century. So you can't be sola scriptura if you're relying on, if a corrupt church cannot produce an incorrupt Bible, you see. And sola scriptura itself is not recited in the Bible anywhere as sola scriptura, you know. Now, to be fair, I did go to my wife's church for many a month, for about 2 years, because I thought, as a father, it was my job to make sure that my family was all one denomination. I didn't want to introduce the bullying of interdenominational disputes into my family. But my wife's church, even though they saved my life through prayer, I give all credit to them for their prayers. Urged God to show His grace and grant a miracle. They talked about their leader and their founder just as much as they talked about Christ, you see. And when I was young, I went to a Lutheran church, and Lutherans also talk about Luther more than they talk about Christ, at least in my experience. And I also found out, and no offense to my Protestant friends, the Protestant arguments that the Protestants use against the Catholics, I recognize them all, because I, as an atheist, use those same arguments against the Christians, you see. And when I talk to my Protestant friends, they would say things that they would say the Catholics believe this and the Catholics believe that. And I talk to the Catholics and they would say, no, this is what we believe. This, and the Protestants were always wrong about what the Catholics believed. When I talked to my Catholic friends and they said Protestants believe this, Protestants believe that, and then I talked to my Protestant friends, the Catholics were correct. So one side understands the other side, and the other side doesn't understand the first. Now, again, that's just the group I spoke with. That's not. I'm not saying this is true generally. And in America is basically a Protestant nation. So it's no surprise that Catholics living in America would know what the Protestant doctrines were, and the reverse might not be true. But I also found out that the Catholic claim is so fundamentally fundamentally different and more fundamental than the Protestant claim that I could not in good conscience join communion with the Protestants anymore. So I went to RCIA and became a Catholic. So basically, a supernatural event was necessary to change me from an atheist to a Christian, but human reason was all I needed to become Catholic, because the Catholics, although they have a mystical side, are very logical and legalistic in their thinking. So I'm a Vulcan, so they convinced me to join a church that was a church made for Vulcans. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Oof.
Oh, and also, I can't stand people who mock Mary, because I met her. She's the most beautiful woman I've ever seen. She was filled with sorrow, and she didn't know why we killed her son. He hadn't done anything wrong. He went around healing people.
Filled with sorrow, I've heard, because she always wanted a girl.
Many women do, but she didn't say that to me.
No, I'm sorry. I couldn't resist a little. Mary's okay with me teasing her. But I won't mock her. You're
Well,
right.
in that case, I will tell you something that I did not see in a vision, which is when Christ was next to the woman taken in adultery, and asked, "Let he who was without sin cast the first stone," and the stone came wigging from the back, and Christ caught it in his hand and he goes, "Mom,
Mom." Cool.
So, just for the record, I tried to find the verse that you mentioned you heard in the vision. That would be John 5:22, and the actual wording in the New American Standard Bible, or actually, I'll use the King James version for gravitas. For the Father judgeth no man, but hath committed all judgment unto the Son. So that seems to be.
He
the
didn't
closest
say
we
hath and unto to me, so he must not have been using the Elizabethan English. But yeah, that was the sentence.
Yeah, so very, very, very similar to what you described in the vision. I've heard you tell the story before. I heard it on the Lepanto podcast as well,
Okay.
which was also quite entertaining. So I knew it was a good story. You actually already answered the one question that I had for you, which was why not the Christian Scientists in this
Yeah.
case?
Because they talked about Mary Baker Eddy too much. It was thin soup. If I was a Christian Scientist and I wanted to go out and read a Christian Science book, where would I go? They don't have. I'm a man of the West. If I wanted to go to see a cathedral, it would be a Catholic cathedral. If I wanted to read a book if I wanted to read Augustine or Aquinas, I wanted to be in the same church as King Arthur. Okay, let me just put it that way. I mean, they were the Christian Scientists. I don't believe are wrong. I think their doctrines could be reconciled with the truth. I think they phrase them in a way that the Inquisition would find heretical, but I don't think they're basically wrong with their radical reliance on Christ for healing. But that said, all they talk about is the healing ministry. All in order to fit their doctrine, all they have to misinterpret certain passages in the Bible, which have a clear meaning, to try to corkscrew it into their particular approach. They're not wrong, but they're one dimensional. They don't have the fullness of the faith. They don't have all 7 sacraments. And let me tell you the real reason. Let me tell you the honest to goodness reason. They don't forbid contraception. Neither do the Lutherans. Neither do the Eastern Orthodox. You see, no other church came. The reason why I became Christian is partly because I was disgusted with a world who did not follow the Vulcan chain of logic that said if marriage is a real thing, if marriage is necessary to raise children, if the human beings are alterichial species, we don't leave our eggs on the sand like sea turtles, okay? Then we cannot have sex outside of marriage. If we cannot have sex outside of marriage, just as a matter of prudence, I'm not even talking about a religious argument here, just as a matter of legal prudence, if we cannot have sex outside of marriage, we cannot encourage those passions that incline men to have sex outside of marriage, okay? If you can't encourage those passions that allow men to have sex outside of marriage, you cannot allow for homosexuality, because there you only have masturbation between 2 partners. You can't even have sex. It's nothing but the pleasure. It's the pleasure entirely divorced from the reason for it. Okay? Now, once you say that, you have to say contraception, therefore, is artificial sterility and is illogical. Not that it's immoral, not that it's good or bad, not that it's legal or illegal. It is illogical because it's against the purpose for which sex exists. Now, my postmodern friends will say, well, nothing exists for a purpose, in which case I will say, well, in that case, your statement doesn't exist for a purpose. Shut up. I'm very rude to my postmodern friends. I don't believe a word they say because they don't believe a word they say. But that was the logic that drove me to paying attention to Christians. It didn't convince me to be Christian, but it convinced me to stop hating Christianity. Once I stopped hating Christianity, it seduced me with basically C.S. Lewis and G.K. Chesterton, who were men like me. They think like me. And my fellow atheists didn't think like me. Okay. Now, once I'm at that level, when I was trying to decide between denominations, I could not even take seriously any denomination that before 1930 rejected contraception as gravely immoral, and after 1930 changed their mind, abandoned Christian tradition, and said, "Oh no, it's allowable." I would not even look at them because they
it's interesting. I had a conversation with someone. I was at a youth group meeting, And there was a gentleman there who was young, in his 30s, I think, married, and he was talking about he was struggling with the teaching on contraception. Now, I have nothing. This person, pray for him. I believe his name was Paul. He was being very honest and forthright, and he was very clear about his desire to be loyal to the Catholic Church. So I am not accusing him of bad motives, but he was saying that he just was not very convinced by the arguments against contraception. Now,
But he was convinced by the
but
arguments for transubstantiation. Seems like that's a
yeah,
lot
well,
harder to believe than contraception.
this is the problem. Well, this becomes the problem, though. He revealed the real issue. He said he brought this up to his wife, and he was very clear. He said, I am not bashing my wife. She's a great wife. You're getting like one snippet of a longer conversation. So I'm going to add all of the caveats he did and also not use his last name for privacy reasons. But
But we are putting his email address and home address in the show notes. So the mob will be there at the next Wednesday.
If you have anything to say, you can find him at this address. No.
Mhm.
But he was saying that his wife threatened to divorce him if he started using contraception.
I'm
And
sorry,
all of
but
a sudden, the conversation changes.
the day
let me add one
Yeah,
other
keep
thing to my conversion story, which I did not say in any earlier versions of the story.
Ooh.
The reason why I gave up on contraception is because my wife allowed it. The reason why I became Catholic is because my wife urged me to become Catholic, because she saw that on my blog, on my journal, all the comments by all my friends were all Catholics. They all thought like me. And she said, God obviously intends him to be in that church. Okay. Now, she's a very pious, very Christian woman. Okay. But I could not have switched. I could not have become Catholic if she had said, if she had done to me what your friend's wife did to him. So,
yeah, and the other thing too was that, with all due respect to the priest there, who was like, "Oh, you're on a journey," he made a comment at some point about he thought that Catholicism was the was best for some people's spiritual journeys, and I'm like 30 years younger than this priest, who is a Monsignor and who everybody there loves. So there's very little that I could say in response, except that doesn't seem right. Maybe.
yeah, because some people can
True or it
handle the
ain't.
truth and others cannot. No, that's an
So
evolutionary
that's
view.
right. But there's very little I could do in this moment. I just recommended he take a look at Humanae Vitae. So, but
I've
it was
also spoken
interesting
for.
because what was that?
I've also spoken for half an hour. Do any of you other does the father want to say what his faith
Oh, I
journey
was about to ask Father. That was my next take.
Sorry.
So, Father Wetta, do you have a dramatic conversion story involving a vision?
Not exactly. I was just going to say that I will have some sort of dramatic conversion if an angry mob shows up outside anyone's house because they're using contraception. If that ever happens, I'll be converted to something. I don't know what, but no, I was raised Catholic. My dad's a historian, my mother's an artist, so I didn't really grow up in a conventionally Catholic family that like prayed the rosary around the fireplace in the evenings or something, or at least that's the way I envision other Catholic families doing it. I did go through an atheist phase when I was in college, but it didn't last very long. I was a terrible atheist because I still went to church on Sunday. Figured I didn't want to burn all my bridges, But basically, it was Richard Dawkins who did it for me. And he hadn't actually published his book on God yet, but the selfish gene I used to carry around like a Bible. But it was actually okay. Well, it was partly miracles that did it. I was studying archaeology in Rome, and gosh, I don't know how far back I should go. Well, I'll start with that. I was sort of going through an atheist phase because you see the foreskin of Jesus and the all these, and a feather that fell from the wing of Gabriel at the Annunciations. I mean, you start to wonder like how much of this is just made up. And but then again, well, I don't know. On the other hand, if I was there at the Annunciation, I'd certainly want to keep something that was there. Anyway, the I always used to take a particular bus from the Roman Forum where I was working. I got to dig the temple of the Vestal Virgins. I don't mean that like metaphorically. I didn't like dig it. I dug at it, dug the Hypocauste system actually. But anyway, in the afternoons I would take a bus from work to the Vatican, and this particular bus was famous for its pickpockets. And to make a long story short, there's a monk on the bus, and I didn't even know that monks existed at that point. So I was pretty interested. I was watching him, and I noticed that a pickpocket was trying to rob him. So I walked up next to him, and I tapped him on the shoulder, and I said, "Excuse me, this man's trying to pick your pocket." And he said, "Yeah, I know, but I don't have any pockets." I thought it was funny. And I thought, well, I've got to get to know this guy and what he's about. And one thing led to another. I ended up getting a summer job at a monastery, and that sort of led to St. Louis Abbey. But that particular monk, he and I had a late night conversation. And I remember saying to him that as much time as I have spent in prayer, you would think I'd be a better Christian by now, but I'm actually a worse Christian than when I started, and I have less faith now. Like if this were juggling, I'd be a great juggler by now. But so there's something wrong with the system. Like there must not be a God. And he said to me, he said, "Well, clearly what you need to do is pray more," which seems like a silly piece of advice to me. So I remember he actually, that was the first time he read to me a passage from Rainer Marie Rilke's Letters to a Young Poet, and I used to have it memorized. But he says something like, "I beg you, dear sir, to learn to love the questions themselves, and thereby gradually live your way into the answers. Consider them like locked rooms or books written in a very foreign language, which you wouldn't be able to understand even if you could read them now." Anyway, I said to him, "Well, that's just absurd." And he said, "Well, try praying to St. Therese of Lisieux. She'll bring you a rose." And I said, "How about I pray to the tooth fairy and she brings me a quarter?" And I remember saying that because I thought it was rude even at the time. Lucky for me, he was a nice guy. But I tried. The next day I was working. He actually, I'm telling this story completely backward, but he once my job working on the dig was over, I wanted to stay in Italy, so he got me a job working as a janitor in his monastery. And a bunch of the monks were away for the summer, and I opened up the door of one of the rooms, and there was this cheesy metal relief portrait of Saint Therese of Lisieux, just exactly the sort of thing that I just despised in Catholicism, the sort of fluffy lamb Jesus painting. It wasn't even a painting, it was this ridiculous thing. So I dusted it off, and I said, "All right," very much like Mr. Wright's prayer. I said, "I don't believe this is what you do, but if it is the kind of thing you do, and if God exists, then I need a rose now." And I shut the door, opened up the door to the next room, and there was a red rose, a fresh red rose on the table in the next room. And so I grabbed the rose and went running back to Father Francisco's room. I said, "You see this? You see how powerful the human mind is? Like, I must have known it was there ahead of time, somehow instinctively sensed it, and but the funny thing was that, like, every time I mentioned her name, roses turned up, to the point where, like, I took a book off of the library shelf, and I said, "Trace, I need a rose." I opened the book, and rose petals fell out on the floor. And this just happened again and again and again. And So
I have to interrupt,
yeah.
Father, because the look at how powerful the human mind is the same thing that I thought
yeah.
that I said, look, if these things happening to me are coincidences, why don't I just become Christian anyway? Because I could use more coincidences in my life.
That's brilliant. I love it. Yeah. I fear sometimes that I am a Christian because I just enjoy it. You know, I worry sometimes that
Mm.
if I lost my faith, I'd still do it just because I like being a Christian.
I have to say, as an ex-atheist, it's much more enjoyable than atheism, because the only point of atheism is either you throw yourself into a whirlwind of pleasure, hoping to distract yourself from the eternity of death that awaits you and all the human race and everything you love and admire, and every monument and every gravestone will eventually be whirled away into dust and nothingness. Okay, you have to go to an orgy to distract yourself from that, or you have to turn yourself into a man of iron and simply not fear death by an act of will, like the Roman Stoics did.
Wow.
Okay. Now, when I was a Stoic, I could not do that. But when I was dying of a heart attack and became a Christian and went to the hospital, it should have been the worst days of my life, but it was the best. It was the happiest. I simply was not afraid of death. I had achieved Stoicism by itself cannot make you a Stoic, but the Holy Spirit can make you a Stoic and more beyond. It's a lot more fun being Christian. For one thing, atheists don't sing. I mean, they don't sing hymns. They don't sing. I sing in church now so loudly that I get compliments from everyone who's trying to get me to shut up.
Isn't that
Yeah,
funny?
I've had the same thing happen where someone goes, "You should really join the choir." Now, I am a terrible singer, and I know, like, this is not me being modest. You know, I did theater in high school. I know very well, like, I am a terrible singer, but
Oh,
I'm loud.
I was being modest.
Loud.
I'm actually a great singer. I have a huge range. I have a great baritone. I have a loud voice. I can hit all the notes. I'm just wonderful. So no, I just can't join the choir because I don't have the time. I'm busy writing science fiction books.
And
Well,
humble.
I'm loud, which makes people think I am better than I am because other people don't sing out, and I do. So they go, "Wow, you can sing," and I'm like, "I don't think that that's true, but thank you for the compliment." Uh,
You know, it's funny.
yeah, since the
I was just
go ahead.
thinking, I just finished a book called The Sociopath Next Door, or maybe it's called The Psychopath Next Door. I can't remember. But she starts it off by saying that when she teaches this class, she's a Princeton psychologist, I think, and she teaches a class on psychopathy. And she says, what would you do? She asked her class, what would you do if you really did not care what anyone thought? And she says that initially all of her students say, oh, I do all these, I do whatever I want. I'd have all this freedom. But she says, when you start thinking about it, things only really have meaning because of the people you love, And it strikes me just suddenly that your story, Mr. Wright, about atheism and the despair that comes with that is very like that. Like, as a Christian, you look at atheists and you kind of envy them, their freedom, or I do. And I say, boy, if I didn't have all these rules weighing me down, I could really have fun. But it's just the opposite, isn't it? That it's those
Well,
rules that enable you to have fun.
other atheists live their lives in other ways. I was a Stoic atheist. I did not believe in God because logic told me there was no such thing. But I certainly lived as logically as I could and tried to be as moral as I could because logic demands it.
Why?
I don't know about other people, but I lived by rules my whole life.
But wait, if atheism, so if there is no God, then I don't see any point in being morally good, morally righteous. Why not
Because-
just do whatever you want?
Because if your thoughts do not align with reality, then you're insane.
Right, but going out and having orgies assuming you could even manage that, having orgies every night would be really fun, wouldn't it?
In the short term.
Yeah.
Also, when I was an atheist, I still believed in something like the golden rule. I still believed that logic required I use the same standard for myself as I used for other people.
But if you're just
I still had a sense of honor.
If you're just a bunch of electrons, who cares whether you're?
I was not insane when I was an atheist. I knew that I had a mind. I knew that I existed as a self. I just didn't think I had an immortal soul. Okay. I was still a man of honor.
Yeah.
I was still as intolerant as I am now. I just was intolerant about different things. Now, but if you drill down far enough, you'll find out that there is something arbitrary in atheism, even in my atheism, which I tried to make as logical as possible, which is the question of why is life better than death? Why logic rather than illogic? Does it make you happy? See.
Well, I have to say that I have a certain admiration for my atheist friends, because they seem to be morally righteous people, most of them, or not all of them.
No,
Whereas,
because I thought that adultery was okay until very late in my career. It was that.
oh, really?
And Ayn Rand is a famous atheist, and she believes in adultery. And Dawkins has
Really?
never spoken up against adultery. All these guys are atheists because they want to sleep around.
Not Philip Pullman.
No, not Philip Pullman. I don't know about what his problem is. The other problem with atheism is that if you're an atheist, you can't write a good science fiction book. It has to be dramatic. And then I really did not like. I read Philip Pullman when I was an atheist. I was on his side, and I could see how undramatic his worldview was. He started strong.
Yeah.
The atheist conclusion that follows logically is the undramatic conclusion. True drama requires something like Christianity.
Yeah, that's what I told him. The first book was brilliant, but the more he got to the point, the less interesting the books became.
You and I are of one spirit, Father. That's exactly right.
Interesting. But I have to say I have the same sort of admiration for my fundamentalist friends. I nearly married a fundamentalist, actually, and it always amazed me that she was virtuous simply because she loved God. She had no fear of hell whatsoever. But she was virtuous anyway. Whereas I've got to have the stick as well as the carrot, and all she had was the carrot. But it was still, I gotta say, that's pretty impressive to know you're going to heaven and be virtuous anyway.
I had a good friend who once asked me, and it's a very common complaint against, I don't know if complaint's the right word, criticism, or maybe even just question that Catholics get, which is Catholics are known for Catholic guilt, right? You go, and I was being asked, like, and this was a very serious question by a good friend of mine, right? And he asked me, I don't understand how you could live with like this idea that you need to confess your sins. Like, I understand like that confession is good for the soul, but that you need to, or you won't be forgiven. And there's this whole thing about like, fear of hell for imperfect contrition versus perfect. And I said, well, I've thought about that as well. And I said, for me, the best that I could tell you is it's almost the opposite. If I did not have confession, I don't know how I would go around thinking that I was forgiven, because my motives are certainly not pure, but confession promises me that my motives don't need to be pure. I just need to be afraid of going to hell. Which
if it weren't for confession,
so
if it weren't for confession, I wouldn't know what my sins were. I wouldn't have the time for self-reflection that confession gives me.
I happen to also say that if you gentlemen were Christian from long ago, the first time I walked into a confessional booth, and I had an entire lifetime of blasphemy, not to mention various other crimes I won't bore you with, to confess. And the priest said, "Okay, say 3 prayers." And I said, "Is that all?" He said, "A little lump leavens the whole loaf, my son."
Yeah.
And I actually felt a physical sensation crawl through my body, like a horripilation of wonder, of pleasure, as if a light had gone on inside me, and I couldn't believe it. It might have been just a psychological reaction, but I honestly believe it was spiritual. I honestly believe something miraculous happened to me inside my soul at that time. And I said, I could not live without this sacrament. I could not be a Protestant without this. This is the best thing that's ever happened to me. I was in delight. Now, I think that's because I came to it as an adult, when I had a whole lifetime of... I blasphemed every single day because I was really an atheist. I wasn't a play-at-it atheist. I wasn't a pretend atheist like Mr. Dawkins. I had real strong, severe arguments, not historically illiterate babblings like his. I'm sorry. I was such an atheist that I looked down on other atheists for not being atheistical enough. Okay. My fellow atheists wanted to remove "In God We Trust" from the dollar bill. And I said, "You're no true atheist. We true atheists don't believe symbols have meaning. We don't believe in witchcraft, and you do. and you do. You're superstitious.
Well, that's interesting.
So
Well, I have news for
I
you.
love confession, and I tell people the reason why I go to Catholics, and the reason why I try to adhere to Catholic guilt is because I don't have enough guilt in my life.
Well, my
I
friend,
need more. I need
my
more.
friend Umar, who's a Muslim, he says, "Where there is no shame, there is no honor." But
There's probably something to that idea.
I
Uh,
gotta say though that as before I was ordained a priest, I used to look forward to hearing confessions. Like I thought there would be you'd like get the secret window into people's lives, and I just have to say that it's like been the most disappointing aspect of my ordination is how boring people's
They're boring.
confessions
They're
are.
boring to us too, Father, because mine is the same every week,
Yes.
week in and week
Yep.
out.
Oh
'Cause
yeah.
I got one habit I can't break. Okay.
Yeah, well, I mean, I used to. My confessor made me stop saying it, but the confiteor usually goes, oh my God, I am heartily sorry for having offended you," and I used to say, "Oh my God, I am half-heartedly sorry for having offended you," because I know I'm going to do it next week anyway. But the thing, I love that the priest heard your confession and only gave you 3 Hail Marys. It's great because it's not your work; it's all grace, right? So
I cannot tell you how impressed I
sure.
was that not only did he he had absolute power over me. If he had told me wear chains until they rot off of their own accord, like some evil king in the Middle Ages, I would have done it. Okay,
Yeah.
I put myself into his hands. He had absolute authority over me at that time.
Mm.
I wonder if people who are not lawyers ever think about how these things actually work. Because I'm a
Yeah.
lawyer, and of course, to me, it looks very legalistic.
Yeah.
And the fact that I was shown such mercy was astonishing to me. And people who have been Catholic forever, I don't think you see how. I think you have to stretch your imagination to see how wonderful it is. I think you just
Yeah.
don't know. You know.
Take it for granted.
Well, there's also another thing I have to say. Do you know when Doubting Thomas was saying he had to put his finger to the wound of Christ before he would believe that the guy had come back from the dead?
I
And then Christ shows up, and he goes, "Oh my God, it's you!" Christ says, "Blessed are those who have believed without seeing." And I said, "Dang, I that's a blessing I don't get. I'm the only empirical Christian I know. I believe in God because I saw him, so I have empirical proof."
Yeah, what was he wearing?
Yeah, it's
Who, Christ?
Yeah.
It was a plain kind of a simple looking robe. It wasn't anything fancy.
He wouldn't. Okay. I always kind of figured he'd wear Nikes.
I didn't look at his feet. I didn't see his feet.
Okay. I don't know why he should wear Nikes, but
Because Nikes is Greek for victory. Of course, he wants that in victory. Don't be absurd.
plus the pagan god of victory is crushed under his feet.
There you go.
Goddess, thank you very much.
Goddess, I'm sorry, you're right. My mistake, but still, same principle. Yeah, I went through this whole process in high school. So I went to a Catholic high school. My family was Catholic, but I was of a family that we moved over here, and we're an Italian Catholic family. You know, like I'm Italian all the way back on both sides. Like Italian Americans met in high school, married. You know, we're high school sweethearts. But when we moved out here, I distinctly remember being told, we're going to look for a Catholic church, but if we find another church that's not Catholic, that's fine, as long as they're Christian. Like, that was the attitude, right? Well, in high school, I went to a Catholic high school after going to a public middle and elementary school. A speaker came one day who was an anti-abortion speaker. Now, at the time, if you had asked me if I was against abortion, I would have probably said, I guess. Would have been like, I don't know, it's probably, maybe not in rape, right? Like, that seems harsh. Well, the speaker came in and she did such a great job that by the end of her presentation, I was completely convicted as like a logical, ironclad certainty that this was a moral issue I simply could not turn my back on, that I was completely wrong. Like, the speaker finished and I was like, abortion is evil. Obviously, I can't believe I missed it. It's a very, very obvious thing. So I went through the whole thing that you do in high school, which is the new atheists were big at the time, right? And they kind of scared me because they seemed convincing to me, a dumb high schooler. And I went and looked into it, and I found Dr. Edward Fazer, who is a Catholic Thomistic philosopher who basically his early career was built off of refuting the new atheists, and not just refuting them, but he would give to them as good as they got.
May
you
I
know.
may I interrupt for just a second?
So,
I only
yes.
want to say something. I want to confirm that you gentlemen are younger than I am. I could regard the new atheists as punks. They do not represent true ancient atheism the way it goes back to the treatise of the three impostors. Okay, they made weaker arguments than they could have made. They were hogging the spotlight. Basically, they're a phenomenon of they're post 9/11 phenomenon.
But they were so cool, though. They're so cool.
They are one of the things that drove me away from atheism because I thought the atheists were going crazy with them. But enough about me. Go ahead, please, Anthony.
Enough of you talking about me. What do you think of me?
Exactly. No, you're absolutely correct about the new atheists, though.
And the father's correct about my ego.
Well, I was talking about myself. You too. Yeah, well, obviously. But I want to know how old you are, Mr. Wright, because I don't feel like I'm that young of a.
I was born in 61.
Oh, okay. You are old. Never mind.
No, that's okay. When I was old as a teenager because I also thought everything around me were young whippersnappers that didn't understand where things come from or where things are going.
Well, you're 10 years older than I am, so you're
so
really
the new atheists to me, I encountered them when I was 30. I didn't encounter them as a child. See, and so they seemed really shallow to me. I mean, when one of them says, I forget which one, the guy who wrote for the Christopher Hitchens, he says, religion causes all wars in history. I said, are you kidding? Read Thucydides. Wars are caused by fear, love of gain, and honor. That's what causes wars. Religion is icing on the cake.
Not to mention that the two most violent human conflicts in history were provoked by atheists, right? Or three, really, if you consider World War II.
Yeah.
But anyway, we won't get into that.
But yeah, I discovered Dr. Fazer, who I still greatly admire to this day. He was a Thomistic philosopher, and he just about ended all doubts I had from a logical perspective. I was like, okay. It also just opened my eyes at the time, and it was also the fact that I had a really brilliant theology teacher. And I will mention his name because I'm complimenting him. Shout out to Mr. Gowell.
What was his name?
Mr. Gowell. Gowell.
Oh man, I wish that was my name.
More of the humor of God, giving a man who teaches people to go well the name Go Well.
Yeah, I know. I have a friend whose name is Father Pater Noster. Can you believe that?
Fantastic.
And I got stuck with Wetta, which is apparently now a derogatory racial epithet now. Like as if it weren't bad enough to be Wetta, which is already insulting in English, and in Mexican Spanish it means white girl. Now it's become a racial epithet, so I'm just out of luck on every. I think I'll change my last name to Go Well. That's great.
Well, Father, when you become Pope, people only refer to you by your chosen first name. So there's that.
All right.
And I have to say, with a name like Wright, I not only have puns on my name, but they're all good puns.
Yeah,
my wife married Mr. Wright. I'm a worker and so on and so forth.
Well, I won't. Yeah, Wetta the pants, Wetta your bed, Wetta burger, Wetta. I pretty much heard them all. And someone from Portugal told me it's insulting in Portuguese as well, but I think he was just giving me a hard time. I hope he was. It's bad enough.
We all have our crosses to bear, Father.
Yeah. Have you guys seen this movie Nefarious yet? Because I saw it yesterday with my parents, and the demon sounds a lot like you, Mr. Wright.
I take that as a very high compliment.
Yeah. Well, somebody pointed out to me that the only person who actually tells the truth the entire time in that movie is the demon.
Well, now someone just today was recommending it to me, and I didn't want to see it because I'm easily spooked.
It's
scary stories scare me.
Yeah.
But then they said, "Oh no, it's not scary. It's more like the Screw Tape Letters," which I love, by the way.
Yeah.
I love the Screw Tape Letters, especially if John Cleese does the voice of the demon in the audiobook. He is so sarcastic and so wonderful for the part. Yep.
Well, I didn't want to see it just because I thought it was a Christian movie, and I feel the same way about Christian movies I do about Christian rock. I think it's out of place, but it really was good.
Yeah, we have to. I think you and I are agreed. We have to get back to when Christian artists did things like the St. Matthew's Passion by Bach, or what's that, the St. John's Passion? I forget which one is which. And built cathedrals rather than boxes to worship in.
Oh, for crying out loud! Yeah.
All the best art, even in science fiction, some of the best science fiction stories I've ever read were by C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien.
Yeah.
Even in an atheist-heavy field like that, all the best art comes from the Christians.
Yeah,
and I leave it as an exercise to the readers to find out why. But there is a reason, of course.
I call the latest wave of church architecture ICU art. It's all either like filthy, disgusting, or it's sterile. It's like intensive care unit walking in.
So this is a good.
I've also seen Christian movies and Christian books that were just bland, and they remind me of Hallmark cards. And then every now and again, I see a movie with a Christian theme that is really well done, and I think
it should be.
I think Christians have to write from the heart and not write to the. They can't pander even to a Christian audience. If you're trying to make it sound Christian, then you're not paying attention to the muse. But if the muse is loyal to God and you're loyal to the muse, you're going to end up writing God's words, whether you want to or not.
That's brilliant. That's right. Yeah, a friend of my mother's used to say, "Nothing will kill a work of art like an idea."
Yeah. Now I try to write lighthearted action fiction, and I end up.
I could tell. I just started reading
philosophical treatises.
Was it Awake? I just started reading Awake in the Nightland, thanks to Ben and Anthony. And yeah, that's a real lighthearted romp, isn't it?
And from a guy who says he doesn't like spooky stories. Yes. Well, of
brilliant title. I'd read it. I would have bought it just for the title.
It's not my title. The title comes from William Hope Hodgson. The book is a complete ripoff. There's a guy named William Hope Hodgson who was a writer who wrote. He was killed in World War I, and he wrote the spookiest story I've ever read, called The Nightlands.
Have you read E.M. Burridge's Smee?
No, because I don't like spooky stories.
It's about.
But this one really got me.
And it's about a bunch of kids who play hide and seek in a castle, and there's an extra person playing with them.
even that is got my hackles up.
Yeah.
So this guy dies. This guy dies in World War I. And he writes a story that is brilliant and forgotten.
What's it called?
The Nightlands.
But it's not Awake in the Nightlands.
No, because my main character was awake when everyone else was asleep.
Yeah,
because he was hearing voices in bed.
What's the guy's name again? I'm gonna look.
William Hope Hodgson.
William, because I teach a class. I teach English to high schoolers, and around April 1st we read funny stories and try to analyze what makes them funny, and around Halloween we read scary stories and try to analyze what makes them scary.
I don't recommend reading his story because it's written in a kind of fake, archaic fashion that is difficult to read. Oh. But some of the ideas are so spooky and so wonderful that I
like what? Spoil it for me.
Well, you you read my story. I went ahead and wrote a whole story for you to get those ideas across. Okay.
Okay. All right. Great.
In any case,
I don't have to read Hodgson if I read yours. Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
Okay. Did
I mention my ego? I ran a role-playing game. I ran a Dungeons and Dragons game set in his background in school. Oh. So I had a bunch of notes written up as to what logically else would have had to have taken place in that background given his premise. So then I found a guy asking for stories in that background, a guy named Andy Robertson. So I said, I can write a short story in that background. And he said he wanted it to be a 2,000-word story. So I wrote a 4,000-word story. And my wife said, you can't send that in, it's too long. So I said, okay, I'll make it shorter. So I went upstairs and I retyped it. And I did this, and I came back down and I said, I've shortened it. It's now 4,500 words long. She said, that's longer, not shorter. I said, okay, I'll fix it. So I went upstairs and did it again. It came down. Okay, it's 5,000 words long now. It's getting better. She said, no, you're doing it the wrong way. Eventually, I wrote to a mutual friend of Andy Robertson's and mine and asked him if I could have him look at the story and see if he could fit it in. Robertson loved the story and bought it and paid me top dollar for it, okay? So much so that I was able to buy replace my dishwasher, which had broken.
What?
And then he asked me for more stories in that background. So I wrote like 3 more and replaced my broken microwave and my broken stove. You know?
Wow.
Now, one of the stories, I was an atheist at the time I was writing it. And then I converted, and my last story was written when I was a Christian. But the logic of the story when I was an atheist required a certain rather religious-sounding ending, given what the setup was. And so Robertson's kind of tentatively asked me, well, I'm a Wicca. When did you become a Christian? And I said, I'm not a Christian.
Wicca.
I said, but if you assume that these dark powers exist and there's bright powers that oppose them, therefore QED, there has to be, you see, the logic of the story made it sound Christian just by the needs of drama. Now, here's the funny thing about that. Here's the moral of that story. G.K. Chesterton points out that Christianity is more dramatic than other religions. In Buddhism, if you succeed or fail, you just go on the wheel of reincarnation again, no matter what. Okay? Christianity is like a Penny Dreadful, where the hero is hanging from his fingernails with a tiger above him, and you are either saved or you're damned. and your individual effort, you're not a member of a collective, like in a Marxist worldview. You're an individual, so you decide yourself whether you're going to go to heaven or hell based on whether you accept grace or deny it. Okay, and everything's at stake. Eternity is at stake. Can you think of anything more dramatic than that?
Well, you really have to be the God if you're going to create another world, right? I mean, there has to be a theology of some sort if you're creating a new world.
Yeah. No. Well, most stories just try to keep it in the background, but science fiction usually deals with deeper issues of philosophy, and we have more latitude to deal with those things if we want.
So which is your favorite of Lewis's science fiction?
It is That Hideous Strength, and I say ironically because it was the only book of his I didn't like when I was a child. I was just too young for it. But if you read That Hideous Strength right after reading Abolition of Man, you can see beat for beat and point for point what he's trying to do.
Yeah.
Lewis in an essay says, I don't trust critics who think they can read the minds of authors long dead, because I've had them try to read my mind and to find out what I really meant by this such and such a passage. And I know they're wrong, because I know what I was doing.
Yeah. So, oh, that's great.
The reason why I like Abolition of Man is because clearly Lewis time traveled into the future, like all good science fiction writers do, saw the world around year 2000, 2000, and went back and wrote it down what it was like. You know?
If you ever visit me in St. Louis, I will show you C.S. Lewis's pipe holder, which was given to me by his secretary.
Wonderful.
I actually read That Hideous Strength while I was at Oxford, which makes it all the greater because, of course, Oxford ends up swallowed up into a hole in the earth at the end of the book.
It's disguised as Magdalen College. I believe he changed the names to protect the innocent.
Yeah, well, except that there's a Magdalen College at Oxford, so.
Oh, okay, so he didn't change the names to protect the innocent. Yeah.
Not really.
He knew what he was doing.
But Elizabeth Anscombe is the villain of that story, right?
I did not know that.
She's the cigar-smoking, sadistic policewoman. Yeah, Hardcastle.
Oh, funny.
Elizabeth Anscombe was the villain, huh?
She famously humiliated him in a debate about miracles, and so he made her the villain in his next story.
Always a danger when you mock novelists.
Yeah. Incidentally,
I'm quick to anger.
I don't think I've said this anywhere publicly before, but in my original manuscript of the Eighth Era, where Odysseus goes to hell and finds his way out, Joan Chittister was pretty prominently featured at one point. She's a heretical Benedictine nun, and I had her. I better not talk too much about it. Well, who cares? I had Odysseus mistake her for a man, and then he feeds her to the Cyclops, and then this and that. And my agent, who is Jewish and didn't care about the theology, was like, I don't get what's happening here. Are you angry about something? It's really ugly. This needs to go. So so she ended up just her name on one of the tombs.
My wife, who is also a novelist, has a T-shirt whereon the words are clearly printed. Be careful, you may end up in my novel.
I love it.
Now, she wrote a book called Prospero in Hell, where Prospero the
Ooh.
magician is in hell and his children have to go rescue him. So you don't want to end up in her novel.
Oh, is it? But it's already published, right?
Yes, she wrote
So it's
the
too
whole
late.
trilogy. The whole trilogy is
Mhm.
published. So you're safe.
Okay, now I
You're safe
gotta
from the
find this
Prospero
one.
novels.
Prospero in Hell, huh? I like it. I like the idea.
She writes under her maiden name, El Joggy Lamplighter, which I will write into the chat.
Her last name is Lamplighter?
He has such a better name than you do, Father.
Yeah. What the heck?
She did not want to change her name when we got married. Okay,
No
she said
way.
my name is so cool, you know.
When
And
my
keep it for writing like a stage name, but otherwise, if you don't change your name to mine, then no one will know when you go to pick up the children at school who goes with which.
Oh man, that's what Lamplighter. What a great. I keep.
I gotta tell you the truth, Father. Since you're a father, I gotta tell you the truth.
Okay.
Her father was Jewish.
Does that
and
mean
so
you've
was
been
her
lying to
grandfather.
everyone else? Sorry, go ahead.
Yes, I lied to everyone else. I'm a science fiction writer and a lawyer and a newspaper man. What do you think?
Yeah. Okay.
So
good point.
No, I'm kidding. I tell the truth at all times. It's one of the things I did wasn't an atheist. That's why nobody likes me.
Incidentally, this reminds I was on
No. I got to tell you my story real quick.
Okay, you tell me the story. Go ahead.
Her grandfather was named Kopowitz. Kopowitz during World War II sounded like a German name to people, so he was ashamed and changed it to King. Her father thought the word king was really arrogant. So when he became a Buddhist, he changed his name to Lamplighter because that was a Buddhistic idea. It translated into English, you see?
Yeah.
So her real name technically is King, but her dad changed his name to Lamplighter, and so she's Lamplighter now.
What a great name. I actually keep a list on my phone of all the students I've taught who had worse names than me.
So you can use them in books?
Yeah, well, just so I could console myself. So shout out to Kevin Wacker and Adrian Fedorko, and especially a shout out to Charlie Poo.
Jack Vance wrote a book called The Servants of the Wonk, Wankh, which they couldn't print in English because in England, wonk is a very bad term, so they had to change it to Wanak. So imagine being a whole alien race that has a terrible name.
Yeah, well, I mean, imagine being the president of Russia visiting France, right? Or not president, what is he? Prime minister? I don't know. What are they?
Prime minister. I don't know what he is. Dictator. Pirate. Tyrannos. But I don't know enough French to get what does Putin mean in French.
I think it means whore. I think it's a bad word for a whore, putain.
If you read Johnny Swift, don't read him in Portugal because I believe the island of La Puta, the flying island of La Puta, means something terrible in Portuguese.
Yeah, probably. Well, putana. Well, I shouldn't be saying these words. Of course, they don't mean anything in English, but yeah, I think that means whore as well.
Yep. Not to worry. Our master supped with harlots, so we can talk about them. They're gonna get to heaven before me. I can tell you that. It says so in the good book.
Good.
I'm looking this up, trying to figure out on Google Translate what Putin translates to, and it does go into French as Coutan or something like that.
Yeah.
Though I can't pronounce French, so I might be the wrong guy to ask. But okay, since we kind of moved on to this topic already, we'll do
of wars.
Well, yes, that. But now media we're fans of and things you recommend, which kind of go side by side with each other. So I will mention, because I know that Mr. Wright is a fan of Gene Wolfe, and Father, I am pretty sure you are as well, because I recall you mentioning it in a discussion once, though I might be wrong. But
Gene Wolfe.
Gene Wolfe.
He wrote Shadow of the Torturer.
Oh yeah. And what is it? The Claw
of the Conciliator.
Something it's Shadow and Claw.
Shadow of the Torturer. Shadow and Claw is the omnibus volume that has Shadow of the Torturer, Claw of the Conciliator. All four books together are called Book of the New Sun. And I went to Gene Wolfe. I went with him to mass once. He wore a T-shirt that had a giant wolf on the front.
He's religious. He's a Catholic, is he?
He's very Catholic. You can see it in his books if you know where to look.
Oh wow! I didn't know where to look, but now I gotta go reread all those huge books.
Yeah.
So
And he unfortunately he likes to write mystery books without telling you what the answer to the mystery is. He puts in the clues, but never has the detective come on stage and say, "Oh yes, by the way, this guy's a Christ figure," because that's who the conciliator is. You know.
Oh.
yeah, I've so the reason I bring up Wolf is that Wolf has always been I'm trying to think of the word for it. My white whale, I guess is the way to put it. I've always had a problem with Wolf, but literally every writer that I like is a fan of Gene Wolfe in some way. Either he is their favorite or one of their favorite writers. And every time I read Wolf, I have a problem with him. So I always force myself to read more Wolf, stubbornly thinking that this time I'm going to find a work by Wolf that I really enjoy. And I did find works I enjoyed more anyway. So I've read The Sorcerer's House.
I was going to recommend Sorcerer's House because it's one of his less opaque works. But even at that, the surprise twist at the end is some people don't get.
Yeah, the surprise twist at the end. I read the book. I said, I guess that was fine. Like it was good, you know. And then I saw you wrote a review on your blog of The Sorcerer's House.
Yes.
And you were discussing how brilliant the twist at the end was, and I was like, twist. And I read through your review and said, oh, I did not get that. I guess that is clever. But I read that. I read The Land Across, which I did like. Gene Wolfe. So there's a scene in The Land Across in one of my Pinkerton's Ghost Stories, which is our horror podcast show. In one of the stories, my detective needs to rescue a woman who is going to be used as like an occult ritual sacrifice. So she's being tied on a slab while men in hoods are around. The detective runs in and rescues her, right? It's very dramatic. But I was reading The Land Across, and that scene that I wrote, I had not read The Land Across. I didn't know the plot of it. That scene was basically in The Land Across, except obviously Gene Wolfe wrote it, so his version was much better.
Well, not to worry. I believe the woman being sacrificed on a slab surrounded by hooded figures appears also in Conan stories and nearly every pulp fiction story I've ever read.
Yeah,
so it's not,
I like it.
Oh, it's a trope. Yes,
it works. It works.
It's a trope for sure. Gene Wolfe, of course, does it in a very dramatic way, and he gives his villains an awesome line. So the Land Across, by the way, if you haven't read it yet, I do recommend it. It's a fascinating story because it's about the main character is kind of a spineless guy at the beginning of the story, but as the story goes on, it's very subtle because everything Gene Wolfe does is subtle because he never broadcasts anything ever. But it's very subtle, but you notice as the story goes on, he slowly becomes more and more moral as the story goes on until at the end of the book, the detective who was having an affair with a woman, when he realizes, so at one point in the story, her husband was assumed dead, and then he showed up alive. When he realizes that she did in fact love him and he was in fact still alive, he actually breaks off the affair, despite the fact that she wants to stay with him. So
wait, what book is this again?
The Land Across. The premise is that a guy is traveling in Eastern Europe and his passport is taken away from him by the government with no explanation. And he has to and he's going to be held for trial, but they don't have any room in the prison for him, so they throw him into a private house.
This is The Land of Cross from the Nightlands.
No. This is Gene Wolfe's The Land Across. I typed the name into the private chat.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, it stuck out to me.
Oh, there we go.
He gives
The
his
Land
villains
Across. Okay,
yes.
I got it.
So he gives the villains a line in that scene where they see the detective and they go, "You worship God, poor fool." I'm trying to remember exactly what it was like. The world is littered with the corpses of those who thought they served him. And I
Ooh.
read that line and I said, I'm going to steal that and give it to my villains.
That is pretty
Let me
good.
recommend
Mine.
one more Gene Wolfe short story to you. It's called The Fifth Head of Kerberos. It is also subtle and also indirect. And he also has a habit, which I think is a bad habit. I'm going to actually criticize Gene Wolfe, even though I'm a fan. He never explains his tricks, you see. And that just loses some people. And once you lose a person, you never get him back again. And I don't myself see it as necessary. I don't know why he does it that way. And yet, but it's his muse. Let him do it what he likes.
Is he still alive?
No, he just passed away just very recently. So there's no more books coming from him, which made me sad. That's the sad thing about being a fan of my age, is that I have no more books to look forward to from my favorite authors. I have to sit and write them myself.
What's
And
funny
what's worse is that I'm a big fan of Dante, and he's not producing any new work on this planet.
Yeah.
sad.
Yeah.
The interesting thing about Wolfe is that of all of the books that people love by Wolfe, like his most famous is Book of the New Sun, which I've tried and failed to read several times because I'm not smart enough for it. But my favorite book that I've read by him so far is actually A Devil in the Forest. It's either A Devil in the Forest or The Devil in a Forest. Always
Yeah,
get
it's
it
a
confused.
historical novel. It has the
Yeah.
wonderful line where someone's asking a witch why she lives in a terrible hut instead of in a magical palace, and someone else explains that witches are so filled with bitterness and hatred that they have to live in miserable circumstances. You can't be a witch unless you're miserable. That's in
Yes.
that book. And
Yeah,
it's
it's a
based
great
on
book.
it's based on the lyrics of Good King Wenceslas, because there's someone who lives by St. Agnes Fountain right next to the mountain, and so on and so forth.
Wow.
Yeah, it's that book is one of his more straightforward, of course. There are, don't get me wrong, there are unexplained elements in it. One particular theory, I wanted to bring this up because I want to see, especially Mr. Wright, if you remember the book well enough, perhaps you can see if my theory holds any water. So
I barely remember that book. I'm probably not going to be able to answer your question.
I'll try anyway, just
ahead.
to see. So there's a highwayman in the book named Watt, who is portrayed as a sort of like, you don't really know if he's good or evil or something in between. And then later it turns out that he was like trying to get power from the dark forces, but he also might not have really been entirely evil, right? And our main character is the boy who lives in the village, and he is off with Watt at one point. So he wants to get back to his village, right? He doesn't want to go off with Watt. He told Watt that he wants to run off with him, but he just did it so Watt like wouldn't hurt him, basically. And Watt has been portrayed at this point as being somewhat impressed with the boy. You know, like he kind of takes a shine to him, right? Like almost like it's cute, right? He wants to be an outlaw too, right? But the boy makes a comment to Watt where he says, I have an idea. I'll go back to the village and check on them or something. Like it's an obvious cock and bull story. He's trying to sell Watt. And the boy is just kind of hoping like he could just flee back to the village then. And Watt nods and then strikes at him with a sword. And the boy gets cut but manages to run off. And they mention that he's leaving a trail of blood as he's running. When he gets to the village, they inspect his wound. Watt has not followed him. And they say, wow, you're very lucky. And they go, what do you mean? He goes, well, the way he struck, it was with the muscle. A guy like Watt, you would think he would strike across to which would do more damage. And also, he was bleeding, and Watt is a hunter, a very experienced hunter, and yet he was not tracked back to the village. So, though it was not said, my theory was always, from after reading the book, it's the only Gene Wolfe theory I've ever formulated on my own, right? So, I'm very taken with this, is that Watt intentionally injured him lightly so that the village wouldn't accuse him of being in league with him when he returned. Because Watt knew that the boy wasn't going to stay with him. And yet, this is never stated in the novel. Nobody brings the idea up. Nobody talks about it, but that's Wolfe, right? Like, that's how he writes.
That's how he writes.
He won't explain anything. You're left to work these things out yourself. Also, it wouldn't even it would change the character of Watt. It would make him, I would argue, more interesting, right? Gives him a little bit more depth. But it wouldn't actually change the plot of the story. Like, Watt could have tried to kill him, and the story could have proceeded exactly as it did proceed from that point on. You know. It's a very dark book, but I liked it a lot. Like, it's a book where there's really the only character in it who's even, I think, kind of moral is his girlfriend, who, I mean, she wouldn't be called a girlfriend at the time. That's effectively what she was, his betrothed, right?
Paramour is the word you might be looking for.
Paramour, yeah, that might be the right word. Paramour, his paramour at the time, who it is like very, very, they say like he's gonna marry her eventually. Everybody knows they're going to get married. It's well known. Although she's shown as being kind of, youthfully indiscreet, she goes sneaking out at night with the main character a couple times. Right. She's the only one who's shown to have any sort of moral character in the story. Everybody else is just kind of a bad person, but that was my favorite Wolf book, and I would recommend that book as a good beginner's, introduction to Gene Wolfe. Because at the very least, the story makes sense, right?
Let me recommend the Fifth Head of Kerberos to anyone who hasn't read Gene Wolfe. It's still opaque, but it's transparent enough that you can get the basics of what he intends.
Wait, so now I'm confused. Do I read The Land Across or the Fifth Head of Cerberus?
It depends on whether you trust Anthony Marchetta more than you trust John C. Wright. So you got to pick between us.
Oh man,
mine is shorter.
Okay then.
And won an award. But I have to warn
me at shorter.
I have to warn you because you have to brace yourself, because this story shows what people are like when they have no sense of conscience at all. The first time I read it, I didn't realize what he was doing. He was writing a story about a situation where basically a young man is the clone of his father with no mother, and the father himself is the clone of the grandfather with no mother, and he finds himself trapped in a cycle of not reincarnation, but of scientific reincarnation. And his efforts to break out of the trap simply don't work, and that's the kind of the grim ending of the story. Spoilers. But the way he behaves, because they live in a slave-based society, because the clones are basically slaves of whoever creates them, is so subtly done that you don't notice at first that everyone is basically a sociopath. When the main character comes across his own brother, another clone of himself, who has been altered to be turned into a guard dog type beast, he just kills him with no sense of remorse because he thinks he might be a threat. Okay, and there's no sense of brotherhood there. It's kind of an exploration of what life without God is like. You see. Wow. But I would also recommend, if you want to be a fan of Gene Wolfe, then read the stories by let me think if I can remember this guy's name. George Luis Borges, a South American writer.
Oh
yeah.
If you read him, you'll get where Gene Wolfe is coming from, and he's slightly less opaque than Gene Wolfe.
He wrote Funes the Memorious and the Library of Babel, both of which I think are
he absolutely
on a
did.
Weekly basis.
He absolutely did, and those books and those stories also are depictions of what life is like if there's no God.
Well, the Library of Babel is just basically predicting the internet, seems to me.
There's more to it than that, but yeah, you're right, Father.
Well, yeah. Okay.
Also, did you read his Babylon Lottery, where there's a society that everything is done by lottery?
No.
Oh, Borges is amusing and yet somehow horrible. Ugh. Anyway, Funes the Memorious is the main character, Severian, the guy with the perfect memory in Shadow of the Torturer.
Oh wow! Really?
Yeah. I don't know for sure, but I think that's where the inspiration came from. And Baldander is one of the villains in Shadow of the Torturer, is named by name in a Borges story as a magical creature in one of his make believe bestiaries.
Wow, I'm learning something.
This is great. I know Borges called himself, I'm pretty sure, a huge fan of G.K. Chesterton, which was always very weird to me, right? Because my familiarity with Borges was Library of Babel, which I do remember liking for itself.
Oh, in that case, I'm going to recommend one other short story. It's called Plan Ukhbar Orbis Tertius. It's rather short and very creepy and mysterious, but I think it's Borges' best short story.
Yeah, you better write that in the chat because
Absolutely, I
have
did.
no idea
I
what
wrote
you
it
just
before
said.
I tried to say it because I can't pronounce it.
Wow, I
two-
actually typed in what I sound, and the first thing that came up was the story.
Churches.
That was not
Okay.
close.
The third world, I guess. Churches Orbis.
Yeah,
Yeah, he said like
3 words.
I go,
two
oh,
in
he's a
make-
huge fan of GK.
Chesterton.
Go ahead.
I just finished
Yeah,
reading
that said
his
he was a huge
biography of
fan.
Aquinas. Sorry, go ahead. My bad.
Oh, that's an excellent book.
I'm sorry.
I liked his biography of Francis as well.
Yeah, I read them together.
Chesterton wrote
actually.
biography of Aquinas.
I'm reading it to my children.
No, how old are your children?
When it's 20, I don't remember how old my children are. Hold on. Hey, wife, how old are my children?
Hey, wife. This is how I imagine all married
Sorry, say it
people
again?
speaking to one another.
They're 20 and 25.
And you read it to them at what, bedtime or how
No,
does that work?
Sundays with Daddy. When I explained to my priest that my wife was a non-Catholic and I wanted to raise my kids in Catholicism, he said, "Well, instruct them in the faith." I said, "Okay, they can go to her church every Sunday, and I'll just read to them from Catholic literature every Sunday, and we just call it Sundays with Daddy, and we do it every Sunday."
That's awesome. Did they stop by, or did you do it over the phone, or?
Oh no, my kids have not moved out yet. In the current economic environment, I don't. They were away at college for a while, but the college was slightly too woke for them, so now they're back at home.
Which college was this, by the way?
St. John's College in Annapolis, which is my alma mater.
Was
and
too
the alma mater
left wing for them?
The student body, not the program.
Wow.
The program only has one. The program only has one woke person on it, W.E.B. Du Bois, which they put on rather than George Washington Carver. I mean, excuse me. Yeah, George Washington Carver, which I think is a crime against humanity. But the program is still traditional. It's just the students. No one in the student body, in the discussion classes and in the seminars, believes that truth is true. They don't believe in objective truth anymore. So you can't have my life at that school was interesting conversations about philosophy and literature and stuff with my fellow students.
Yeah.
They can't have that because the students are now all brainwashed into this Marxist belief in moral relativism, that reality is optional, that logic is an imposition on your freedom. And so they don't have any opinions on anything, which they hold very strongly indeed. So,
see, I'm finding the exact opposite in our school, that the kids who want to rebel against their parents, that they become huge right-wing, like Trump-supporting, what is his name?
My kids have a year or 2 years to go. So tell me the name of your school, and we'll send them there to see if they get a good education.
Well, it's a high school, so I think they probably are ready for college.
I need the classics. I need the classics in chronological order.
Yeah, so. Well, in my English class, we start with we start with Gilgamesh, and we end with Wetta. We used to end with Pullman, but Cardinal Burke asked me not to teach him, so I decided
wise. Unless you just want to contrast him with the Narnia books and see this is how you write a good story and this is how you botch it.
Well, see, most of our students have read Narnia and have read The Lord of the Rings, so I ended up at the time we were having them read this horrible book called A Spell for Chameleon, which I found crude and even, dare I say it, misogynistic and just awful. So when I found Pullman, who based his book, on Milton and Blake, and I thought, well,
Pullman based his book on Lewis. I'm sorry, he was writing an anti-C.S. Lewis book.
He was, but the conceit, right, is that the angels of Paradise Lost are regrouping for another attack on God, and I just think that plus the armored bears. I mean, that's worth reading right there.
Everyone likes the armored bears. There you have me, Father. Yeah. Everyone likes the armored bears.
Panzerbjorn.
How could you not like the armored bears? His writing actually becomes like Homeric during the bear fight. I just thought it was great. Credit where credit is due. He's a great author, and he could have been great had he not surrendered his muse to his daimon, to his
That's right.
sense of philosophy, to his
Well,
rhetorical agenda.
you know, the
He
main
could have
character,
been great.
the main character's name is Lyra, right? And she's a liar, and
Right.
she's supposed to be Odysseus, right? She even goes into hell and
Yep.
and visits all the souls of the deceased and comes
But there's
back.
no Penelope at the end. There's no redemption. Instead, she and the boy shake hands and are parted forever. There's no romance.
They give up
nothing.
physical love for the sake of the eternal good, which I think is a very. I think in the end he fails to be as anti-religious as he wants to be. And ends up reinforcing our narrative.
I think the needs of drama require some sort of religion in order to get the proper story arc.
Yeah, he's not really a true atheist because he believes with William Blake that there's some sort of like spiritual substance in the world. Like I don't know, like
is that like a Shaw belief in the Shavian life force or something that's trying to evolve?
It's really a Miltonian belief in like atomic level spirituality or something.
Miltonian.
Yeah, Milton was he was some sort of weird heretic where they believed that all.
Are we talking about John Milton or some other Milton?
Yeah, the Milton. What was he? John. Yeah, John.
Paradise Lost Milton was a. I knew he was a Protestant. I knew he was a Puritan. I didn't know he was a heretic.
Oh, he was a. Yeah, you could see some of the heresy in Paradise Lost if you read it. Like there's, I can't remember exactly what it was.
I can see the anti-Catholicism every now and again.
Well, yeah,
but, I didn't see the heresy.
Some of his portrayal of Christ is very off. Like it's subtle though. You know, it doesn't come out all the time, but you can see it if you read properly.
That's too bad. I was gonna recommend him next on my list of recommendations of Christian books to read.
Sure. Well, Samson Agonistes is pretty great too.
Yeah, that is pretty good. I also like his Comus, especially if you're thinking of becoming a teetotaler.
Did you bring up George Bernard Shaw earlier as someone who believed in like a?
I thought George Bernard Shaw. I could be wrong about that. I only know of Shaw because of what Chesterton says about him. I've never read Shaw, but I thought George Bernard Shaw, the playwright, believed in a kind of hermeticist idea of an ongoing spiritual evolution of a life force that is trying to ever improve itself and drive toward godhood.
You know,
which is very similar to Hegel, by the way. And Hegel, I read in college, and I thought he was a philosopher, so I didn't understand him. And then I heard a lecture from just this year from a guy named James Lindsay, who said, no, he's a magician. He's not a philosopher. He's preaching hermeticism. He's preaching alchemy. Yeah. And I said, bingo, because I knew enough. I had read Hegel, and I knew enough Hegel to recognize the beast once he was identified to me. You know, and so that means Marx, who just took Hegel and made a materialistic version of him, is also just a magician. They're all just witches.
So George Bernard Shaw, I think, is a perfect example of the sort of writer who, because I haven't read a ton of Shaw, but I've read Pygmalion, which was made into the very fun musical My Fair Lady, and I quite like My Fair Lady, and I owe
him my happiness because of the movie version of Pygmalion, not My Fair Lady. My wife fell in love with me.
I owe him my happiness.
So that's pretty good. But he's a perfect example of Pygmalion and My Fair Lady is a very, very close adaptation, by the way. Like it's just
they changed the ending though and changed the point of the story.
So, well, here's the thing, and this is where it gets interesting. Pygmalion. George Bernard Shaw is a perfect example of somebody who is a genius, who is a brilliant writer, very clever, very good, very entertaining, but whose philosophy butts up against the needs of the drama, and this is what happens in My Fair Lady.
Allow me to interrupt quickly and to say Ayn Rand is the same way, in my opinion, and so is, of all people, Tolstoy. Tolstoy's writing is much smarter than his philosophy, than his theory of history. But go ahead.
Well, I think that Shaw's philosophy affects My Fair Lady. So my argument, I don't like either the play or the movie version of My Fair Lady, but my argument is that Shaw crafted Pygmalion in such a way that there is no proper ending to it. He created it in a way where there's no satisfying way to end the story, and everybody immediately picked up on this. from the very beginning, I did research on this. They were constantly changing the ending of Pygmalion because nobody liked Shaw's ending. The problem is none of the new endings work either. The ending of the movie doesn't make any sense.
Shaw's,
There's clearly no
for
romance.
those who don't know, the original ending of Pygmalion is Pygmalion's an ancient Greek myth about a man who makes a statue because all the women in his town are immoral and they have hearts of stone. So he makes a woman out of stone and Venus brings it to life and they fall in love. Okay. And so the idea is that a man can craft his own wife to love him. And in Bernard Shaw, he was mocking the English class system, which divides people by their accents, and said that if you taught a flower girl to speak like a high class accent, you could actually make her into a new woman. And then he falls in love with his own handiwork. Okay. And in the movie version, they end up together as a couple. And I believe in the original play, she ends up marrying Freddie, because Shaw's point is you can't fall in love with your own craftsmanship. If you make a woman, you can't fall in love with her. You're a father to her, and you can't be both a father and a husband. I believe that was his point. Correct me if I'm wrong.
So in the play, it actually ends. So there's a moment in the movie where Rex Harrison, who plays Higgins, right, the guy who's the craftsman of the narrative, right, when he's singing the final song, he has a moment where he goes, "Marry Freddie, ha!" And then he stops and does a little sad reprise and walks into the home. And then Eliza shows up. This is in the movie. In the original play, you could take out the song, but the content of the song is in the play. The line "Marry Freddie, ha!" is the final line of the show. That's just where it stops.
Yeah, she does marry Freddie.
You assume she marries Freddie, and I think Shaw was begging people not to end with Eliza and Higgins together. He actually wrote like an alternate ending where he goes, please, like he wrote an alternate ending where Eliza and Freddie were running a flower shop. The problem is Shaw's ending is not dramatically satisfying.
Correct.
But also, I don't think that Eliza and Higgins getting together works either, because the narrative intentionally is written in a way to not support it. So My Fair Lady intentionally ends on an anticlimax.
My theory is that Shaw was trying to put forward the point, which I think is a correct point, that you can't craft your beloved. When a woman marries a man and then tries to change him, that doesn't work out usually, okay? The woman marries a man and then inspires him to be better, but that's not the same as Pygmalion. The reason why he picked the name Pygmalion is because he's saying that Greek myth is false. So from the get-go, they can't get together and be married. But as a romantic, you can't have true love not bloom in a story about love. That's just not the way it goes. It's not tragic enough to be a tragedy is the problem. I'm sorry, go ahead.
So it's a very depressing ending. It's
weird. But see, I've got the solution. Okay, one of you will have to write this because I'm not a science fiction writer. But at the very end, you can rewrite the place that at the end, the swine come from outer space and abduct her, and that solves everything. You can call it Pig Alien.
We will pass over that comment in silence, Father. But now you have something to confess. Now you have something to confess next week. So
I gotta have something. I'm pretty perfect otherwise.
Yeah, that's the problem with all we Catholics. There's no sinners in our church, or so I hear.
No.
Yeah.
Oh no, my mistake. The church is full of sinners, like a hospital full of sick people.
Who said that? Somebody said that.
It's whenever I argue with my Protestant friends, and they seem to think that we Catholics are guilt-ridden, and that we have horrible people running us, and that we, the Borgia popes poisoned people and married their mistresses. And I always reply the same thing that the priest said to Napoleon: "Sir, if 2,000 years of mismanagement have not destroyed the Holy Mother Church, you cannot. You certainly cannot do it."
Or what Cardinal von Galen told Hitler, which is that the church is an anvil against which many hammers have been broken.
Amen.
It's one of my favorites.
Amen.
What? Ben hasn't said anything. I feel like
Ben, are you alive?
A quarter of the conversation here.
Yeah, he hasn't said anything for an hour and 40 minutes.
I've just been letting you guys chat. It's all good to me. And
we only have gotten through the first 2 points on on our list, and we've been
Well,
at 2 hours.
All we did was bully Ben and talk about our faith journey. Yeah, I guess you're right.
Oh no,
We
we
did,
mentioned no. We said media we're all fans of. We've been talking about that for more than half an hour, and things we
Yeah.
recommend.
and things you recommend. So
The only thing we haven't touched on is politics, and I will sum that up. I'm against it. Whatever it is, I'm against it. I don't care who started or commenced it. I'm against it. You now have my entire political philosophy in a nutshell.
And it rhymes.
I'm stealing it from Groucho Marx, of course.
Oh yeah, you are.
Because I'm a writer. I steal things for a living. I'm like a jackdaw.
Yeah. So what are you working? One of the points was, what are you currently working on?
I am using my writing as therapy, because I saw this movie called Last Jedi that emotionally scarred me for life, and I was so traumatized that I gripped my pen in my teeth and crawled out of the theater covered with popcorn. And I said, I have to write a good version of a space opera that undoes and is the opposite of everything I just saw, that was a horror and a blasphemy against the gods of science fiction. Okay? So I'm writing a book called Star Quest. It's a 12-volume epic. It's my version of Star Wars if I was writing it, not someone else. So I thinly disguise it. Instead of a galaxy long ago, far, far away, I put it in the Andromeda Galaxy. Instead of Jedi, I have Knights Templar, who are mystical knights of the far future. And I decided to throw in a bunch of space pirates. And I decided, well, you can't have space pirates without having
space pirates.
You can't have space pirates without having Lee Falk's the Phantom. So I decided that there was a character called the Ancient Mariner, who's basically one family has taken a vow against piracy, and they passed this evil mask down from father to son. It's not evil mask, but it's a mask of vengeance that might be a computerized hologram thing, or it might be a spirit. The text is unclear. And I said, and I can't have space pirates unless I also have space gangsters. So I have these space syndicate set in the rogue planets off in the far side of the galaxy, run by a group called the Secret Seven, whose chairman is called the Faceless Man. And to hunt for the Faceless Man, I said I can't have a crime drama unless I steal the Shadow. What's that?
Jabba the Shack.
I don't have Jabba the Shack, unfortunately. I have a creepy supernatural demon called the Dark. I don't have Sith. Instead of Sith, I have a race called the Dark Overlords.
Nice.
I'm trying to make this as pulpy as possible.
Have you written?
I've written 8. Now I haven't released any yet.
You are kidding me.
I want to write the whole thing before I release it. Well, I work on the weekends and on the evenings. I have a day job.
Wow.
Basically, my wife gives me time to write. Okay, that's the way it works.
But she's writing too.
Wait, let me finish. I'm just gonna say one more thing.
Oh, yeah,
so I decided for a crime drama, I also had to have Maxwell, the Shadow, Lamont Cranston, except I call him something slightly different. So I have this drunk senator who, unbeknownst to us, is I could not call my main character Napoleon. I couldn't call him Han Solo. So his name is Lone instead of Solo. And his son, the spy Napoleon Solo, I had to change to Napoleon Lone. Okay, so I had to change the names of the spies and so on. But the spy master is actually, unbeknownst to, is the brother of the Star Patrolman, who is secretly the Ancient Mariner. So I stole things from every book and comic that I liked when I was a kid and threw them into a blender and then cranked it up to high speed and tossed in a grenade. And the result is the epic called Star Quest. And I also have a girl named Lyra, who she's my version of a female Jedi, who I do not think should be fighters because I think women in combat is unsightly. So she's like a shrine maiden. She's kind of like an Oriental flavored shrine maiden, but she worships the stars because the people of my background know the stars were made by some holy power, but they have forgotten who that power is. The name was taken away from them when they destroyed the Milky Way galaxy. So they don't know who the creator is, but they know there is one.
Wow. I can't wait till this comes out. How long till you're finished?
I'm waiting for my editor to start revising the first volume. It's gonna need a rewrite, and I'm probably gonna still be working on the 9th and 10th volume by the time the first one comes out. I'm hoping to get it in by late this year, early next year.
Ah.
The
I
first
had
volume, is called Space Pirates of Andromeda. And if you can find a more pulpy, more space opera outrageous title than that, I will give you $1 because I tried my darndest to make this as outrageous as possible. This is not supposed to be your serious science fiction study about the woes of mankind as we're taken over by robots. No, nothing like that.
Oh, that's awesome.
I wrote.
Wait.
So, in terms of stealing things, you're absolutely right. This is what all writers do. Ben can confirm this because it was one of the Pinkerton's ghost stories. But there was a story I wrote that was probably the one that caused us both the most collective stress because I was late on the story because I was stuck on it. And I'm a huge Sherlock Holmes fan. So I wanted to do a Sherlock Holmes story in our occult detective, right? Paranormal detective universe. So I took a Sherlock Holmes story and I said, I'm just going to transplant it to, the Pinkerton's ghost world. And Sir Arthur Conan Doyle has a story called The Copper Beeches. The story is most notable because it introduces a female character who Watson actually ships Holmes with. Like literally, he says he is disappointed.
Irene Adler. That's the one Irene Adler's from, right?
No, not Irene Adler. Actually,
oh,
that
my
is
mistake.
Scandal in Bohemia. This is Violet Hunter. Is this character?
Violet Hunter.
So
Great
in
name.
The Copper Beeches, the story is it's a good story because it's from the early Sherlock Holmes stories, the adventures and memoirs, which are the best ones. And long story short is it takes place in like a creepy manor house, and she's a governess. And something weird is going on with the guy who owns the mansion, and Sherlock Holmes comes to investigate, and they shoot down a killer dog who is guarding the manor, and they learn that she was hired because they have kidnapped the daughter to prevent her from marrying someone, a gentleman who keeps coming to call on her, and keep her in the basement. And the governess has the same shade of hair as the girl who's been kidnapped. So they put her in the window. So when the gentleman comes to call, he sees her there and thinks that everything is fine, and she's just not interested in him. It's a good story on its own. So I said, I'm going to take that, and I'm just going to say, there's hints that it might be something supernatural, and then it turns out to not be, in typical Sherlock Holmes and Scooby-Doo-ish way, right? So I'm just going to make it actually supernatural. And I struggled with this story, figuring out what to do next, how to change it, what to change. The moral of this whole thing, and the fascinating part of it, is I was trying to figure out what to do with the dog in the story, like what role should it have. We were brainstorming different ideas. How should he get to the house, right? Like, because I was going, so how does my detective go to the house? He's hired by a woman who I named Violet Hunter because I'm wear the influence on my sleeve. And she becomes a character in the Pinkertons, or a major character, not a major character in Pinkerton's Ghosts after this. But he's hired by Violet Hunter, and in the original Sherlock Holmes story, the reason they get called to the house is that they tell Violet, call us if anything weird happens, and that's what she does. I tried so hard brainstorming different ways for my detective, Sean, to show up at the home, and finally we settled on maybe he should just call her if something weird happens. And that's what I did. So I used Conan Doyle's answer, because Conan Doyle got it right. And we were discussing what to do with the dog, and I struggled on this. I did not know. In the original story, the dog comes across as a last-second plot device he's set up early on, and then shows up as a last-second threat that Holmes has to shoot down. And we were struggling, and we said, well, how about the dog comes in at the end and attacks him? So, again, I just used the exact same solution that Conan Doyle had originally used in The Copper Beeches. The moral of the story is that stories are not haphazard collections of tropes, right? They are set up in very intentional ways.
If I may, the moral of the story is that the muse has a logic that of her own that drives certain things to her inevitable conclusions, whether the author likes it or not. And the author either cooperates with the muse and produces a story, or bucks against the muse and produces either garbage or propaganda or follow his own ideas. And we've discussed his Dark Materials. We've discussed Philip Pullman as an example of a guy who did not follow the muse to the proper conclusion. Because the proper conclusion of that setup in that story
exactly it.
should have been a war in heaven, which is what we were promised. Okay, God should have died in a huge fiery Miltonian apocalypse, complete with Wagner opera in the background, not coughing and falling out of bed like Joe Biden. Okay, that was a terrible way to kill a god. That was the worst deicide I've ever seen in films. Conan killed gods better than that. Okay, it was terrible. Anyway, but that's a different topic.
His god is basically Dante's Satan, right? He's an angel trapped in a glass spot.
He wishes he was Satan. Satan's impressive in oh no, excuse me, Dante's Satan. No, Dante's Satan is horrible. Satan is a pagan god in Milton in Dante. Right. He's just the most miserable of prisoners in the trapped in the ice. Yes, you're correct. You're quite correct.
Well, Milton uses a bit of sleight of hand with his Satan. And C.S. Lewis, I think, mentioned this brilliantly when he was discussing it. Because he was saying, he goes, Satan, everybody who thinks evil's interesting goes, I want you to take a look at Satan's dialogue. Said Satan goes to the ends of hell, and and the first thing he brings up is himself. He goes to the far reaches of heaven. He talks about himself. He's in the Garden of Eden, paradise. And he brings up himself. They said Satan, no matter where he is or what is happening, cannot seem to find a more interesting topic than himself.
Because Milton was actually a subtle author, and the poets later, I don't know who, Blake, I think it was, said that Milton was of Satan's party and didn't know it. I'm sorry, that is the shallowest possible reason. When you say it's better to reign in hell than serve in heaven, that line is meant to sound grandiose, but it's really shallow. It's really pathetic. Okay, and Satan is actually miserable. Yeah, and he says so in the speech on Mount Nepenthes.
Yeah.
So, and all he ends up doing is degrading himself at the end. He turns into a snake at the end.
Yeah, that's right.
So.
Yeah,
but Dante's portrayal, I think, is more legitimate, is more accurate. But the best portrayal, I have to say, and no offense to Dante and Milton, is C.S. Lewis himself when he makes Uncle Screwtape, a petty bureaucrat who's concerned with his own power and wants to eat his nephew. That is just wonderful. That is classic.
Oh, there's a book that came out a couple of years ago called right, hold on. Never mind. It's something necromancer about a guy who visits hell and shoot. Come back to me. Keep talking. I'm gonna figure out who this was.
So okay, we're at 9:00, which is traditionally around where streams end. But no, look for what you're doing. So I'll end it with this as a general comment. We did this stream fundamentally, and we were very clear about it from the beginning, our selfishness, for two reasons. It was originally
Johannes Cabal. Johannes Cabal Necromancer. Look it up. It's great.
What's it called again?
Put the words in the private chat. And I hope that this private chat can be published with the live stream on YouTube somehow.
We could post it, I guess.
We made a number of recommendations. The best of which is this author named L. Joggy Lamplighter. I don't know who that is, but I think everyone should buy every single book she's written. And if you buy 4 copies, you can give them away to 3 relatives.
And you can always write.
The Rachel Griffin series has come highly recommended by both Ben and I.
It does.
Quite unironically, I enjoyed it a lot.
Yes, because you're a schoolgirl and therefore you love the romance of.
No, I will tell you.
My wife is so amused that her biggest fans are young girls and 40-year-old men. Because they just.
I will
it.
tell you this.
They love it.
This was one of the
Leonardo DiCaprio, right?
Well, also the My Little Pony cartoon, but only the season where the guy was really witty.
So there was there is one thing about the book that and I've had this conversation with Ben before and other people, and I might have mentioned it even to Mrs. Wright once. So I can't recall, but there is in the last Rachel Griffin book, there's a big masquerade ball at the school that Rachel is in, and Rachel is dressed as a cat in the ball. She's a 13-year-old girl. She's very excited for this ball. While this is going on, it is revealed that Rachel's long lost sister, who has been hidden from her family, is actually alive, and they just learned she exists. And all of this is happening while Rachel is at the ball. And it drove me personally absolutely insane that Rachel still seemed to be concerned about this masquerade ball, because I was reading it going, wait, hold on. I want to learn about the missing sister. And she was like, but who will Von Dredd dance with? This was not a criticism. This is entirely realistic to 13-year-old girls
Oh yeah.
who have been fixated on this for months, right? Like, which is mentioned in the book. It was part of the backdrop. But me personally, I'm like, okay, yes, I am admittedly a little curious about who Von Dredd dances with, but I am much more curious about why there is a long lost sister at all, why she was hidden, what do Rachel's parents know. But this is all happening in between the ball.
You should mention the daughter was kidnapped as a baby, and the kidnappers erased the memory of the family, so the family didn't even know they were missing a child. Okay, it was actually one of the most horrible things I've ever heard of in a story. It's terrible.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Oh yes, yeah, and it was very compelling. And my misgiving is not a critique of the book. It is an entirely in character reaction for the character as written. It was my personally where they would skip to the romance bits and the little interpersonal drama, and you would be like, okay, that's great, but tell me more about the sister.
Well, my favorite character is this guy named Siegfried Smith, and I can't put my finger on exactly why he's so appealing to me, but I just think he's just a wonderful character. He's amusing, he's handsome, he's brave. I just think.
Oh, I see. She
He's
just took
on
the
me.
shade from life, right? Yeah.
No,
yeah,
he's the character. He's the character I played in the role playing game that inspired this book, and I wrote some of his lines. I wrote some of his dialogue. But Turnabout's fair play. Her characters that she made up appear in my books, Orphans of Chaos, and in my book, Last Guardian of Everness. Raven, Son of Raven, and Wendy are her characters that she made up for her stories, and I put them in my books. And then I made the Prosperos for my stories, and she put them in her books. So always marry a writer. That's the key to cross fertilization.
Or don't ever divorce a writer. That's the other.
Hey, I'm a Catholic. No divorce for me. I can't get a divorce.
What divorce?
No, there's no. If you take an oath, you live up to it. I'm sorry. I don't see why marriage is different from any other form of oath that mankind's ever taken.
Well.
Oh, good. We have. I was going to do the closeout, but I do want to answer. We have a viewer question, which came very late. Now you've got my full attention. How do you follow the muse? I can say, from my own perspective, following the muse is, it depends on the story. I have had stories that I have written in 45 minutes. They're like 6,000 words long, and I wrote it in 45 minutes, and they need very little editing because it comes out of me, and I know exactly what is going to happen. And I have had stories half that length that took me weeks to create because I did not know what to do or how to do it. It's not a one-size-fits-all thing for me personally. Father Wetta and John, do you have any advice on this matter?
Well, all right. Well, for one thing, I recommend praying, but and meditating and being silent a little bit of each day. But really, I think it boils down to perseverance. Like I guess I wrote 14 drafts of the only novel I've ever published, and the very first one was so bad that I shudder even to think. I mean, what ended up a story about Odysseus coming out of Dante's hell started as a story about a teenage boy with little guns that pop out of his shirt sleeves, and I can't even figure out how that one turned into another. But clearly, the muse did not want me to write a story about a 13-year-old boy with guns that pop out of his shirt sleeves. I mean, nobody wants me to write that book. So
Here's mine.
But first I had to write the bad book, and then eventually I found the muse through trial and error.
I will augment the father's advice and say persistence is the key. Genius is mostly sweat. It's 10% inspiration
Thank
and 90% perspiration. So here's what I do. Every writer right now carries around a notebook or a computer phone where you write down your ideas when an idea strikes you. Ideas do not strike writers any more or less frequently than other people. We just write them down and use them later. Okay, and it's like going fishing. When you're looking for an idea, you can find the right fishing spot and you can find the right bait, but it's up to the muse as to whether or not she's going to give you a good fish or not. Okay, you just have to keep trying until you get what you want. So what I recommend is be unafraid in the face of blank paper. The greatest terror a writer faces is facing blank paper and quailing. Don't flinch. Paper can smell fear. Okay. Also keep in mind that if you've got the right muse, she comes from heaven, and you should be unafraid, because of course the first thing angels say when they meet someone is fear not. Okay. Now, if you're unafraid of the muse, you have to put your ego aside. You have to put aside the way you think the story should go and wrestle with the muse to make it kind of go the way you want, but also listen to her when something logically has to happen and unfold in a certain way that is a way you did not anticipate. So there's always going to be a tension between the natural way it wants to go and the way you want it to go. And it's like a tension between the bowstring and the bow. You have to have both. You have to have the string be flexible, but the bow try to be straightened. Okay? So prayer also is useful, as is meditation. I have a personal theory of writer's block, and I do not know if this will work for you. And accepting advice from writers is always bad, because some things work for some people and not for others. If you let me give you Gene Wolfe's advice first. Gene Wolfe said that if you get blocked in your writing, if you can't think of an idea of where to go next, turn off the radio, turn off the television, go away and exercise. Okay, just do hard physical labor for a while, and it will clear your mind. My advice, since I don't like exercise, is throw out the last 3 pages of what you wrote. Throw out the last scene and rewrite it again from scratch. Okay? Because I believe writer's block is nature's way of telling you you've stepped into a dead end. So you have to back up to the next to the crossroads and start again down another path.
I thought you were going to say throw away the television and whatever the engine.
Oh no, I assume you throw away. I assume you threw away your television long ago when you decided.
Yeah, avoid YouTube.
Otherwise, your IQ is going to be too low to be a writer.
Yeah,
I agree with.
I will say that.
Wait, Ben is speaking.
Ben,
yeah,
go ahead.
I agree with John C. Wright quite a bit, with Father Wetta and Anthony as well. But one of the things that kind of like people, like when they go into a story, it's like, I've got these great ideas, and of course they tell me their ideas when they discover I'm also a writer, and I just love hearing your ideas that you haven't written down yet. People don't stitch together what's in between and what's not. So like, if you're writing an epic fantasy, well, the guy can't be traveling through New Zealand every time you don't have a battle or you don't have something going on. Well, what's the stitch work? What's the music in between it? Tolkien talked a lot about the journey, but sometimes he kind of just skipped large portions of it. Yeah, he didn't say it like this. Yeah, they were walking. No, they traveled and it was hard. And now they're trying to climb the mountain, to avoid Moria, that sort of thing. Like
C.S. Lewis. C.S. Lewis also talked about getting certain ideas, pictures in his head, a fawn in a snowstorm underneath a lamppost, and then sewing the pictures together into a logical format so that one thing leads to another. Yeah. I call it my chess-like thinking, where the hero has a certain moves. You have to limit the hero to certain things he can do and can't do. And then you have to say what the reaction of the villain is going to be based on what the villain knows, not what the author knows. You can't cheat, and to make the counter move to stop the hero, because all plots consist of drama, and all drama consists of someone that the readers really like doing something that he's trying to get to a goal. Either something he fears he's fleeing, or something he loves he's trying to get, and there's an obstacle in the way, and he tries to get around the obstacle, through the obstacle, over the obstacle, and the obstacle counteracts to stop him again. And that's what drama is. Okay? If you have someone who's good at everything, and the only drama is the men haven't realized that she's wonderful, that's what we call a Mary Sue, and that's boring. Okay? There has to be some growth to the character. There has to be something the character can't do that he later on can do. Now, to make your characters likable at the beginning, my suggestion is kill off the characters' parents in chapter 1. Johnny Cross does it. He's an orphan. Frodo's an orphan. Sauron the Great doesn't have parents. He's an orphan. We all love him. The robots, R2-D2 and C-3PO don't have parents. They're orphans. Everyone loves them. Luke Skywalker is an orphan, or should be, and so on and so forth. You know, all the great characters in life. Moses, well, he had 2 moms, so that's the opposite.
I call I have a similar thing, a similar theory that I call dancing with my muse. You want to figure out where the music's taking you, what's going on, what works, and the more you can kind of figure that out, because there's no like hard and fast rules except what defines genre, what defines character arcs, with what you're gonna string together. Even those are more suggestions than rules. Yep.
Yeah.
Like you want to avoid stepping on your muse's toes. That's the only way. There's only one rule in dancing, and that's not offending the lady.
But the gentleman stuff's the lead. You're still the one dancing with her, so you lead. She follows.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Father.
I was just gonna say I would add Reed McKee's book on story writing, and reread it like 20 times, and then the other part of it that I think is that regardless of when the ideas come to you, you've got to set times for when you write, and then like make appointments with the muse and keep them.
I write by set times, but you can also do it by word quotas. Robert Heinlein wrote.
Yeah. Sorry.
One thing
I'm also going to recommend Donald Moss's Writing the Breakout Novel, which is the only book on writing I have ever thought was worth reading. Most writers don't know how to teach writing, and most teachers don't know how to write. But he was an agent, so he read books and he was able to analyze what the winning books had in them, and it was usually the same elements over and over again. Books about redemption, books about characters who undergo character growth, books about how there's a tension between, there's both internal and external tension. There's stakes, there's high stakes that the hero is working for, but there's also internal stakes, things that will change him if he doesn't get his way, and so on and so forth. There are elements that you can just put into a story. If you even have a finished story, you can go back to chapter 1 and just add a line or two or a sentence that changes the whole composition to get additional tension and to get additional follow through. It's like every story element has to have a setup and a follow through, and that's the unspoken contract you make with the reader. And if you have a story like Pygmalion where there's a setup but there's no follow through, that's a cheat. That's why Pygmalion's a story nobody likes. Correct me if I'm wrong, Anthony.
But that's why Pygmalion is going to be a bestseller.
So, Pygmalion, I think, the paradox of Pygmalion is that Pygmalion is quite beloved. It's the ending that everyone hates. But there's so much good stuff in the rest of it that people embraced it anyway. It's a weird experience. That's why I say I would consider George Bernard Shaw something like an evil genius. Like he uses his powers for evil. But yeah, I will say that Pinkerton's Ghost helped me with one thing, and it is this. Pinkerton's Ghost, I need to, once the season starts, I need to, one way or another, I could write it well in advance. I could write it probably no more than the week before if I don't want Ben to kill me.
I'll find
a week before, but yes, he will. But I need to produce a story once every 3 weeks, right? Like, that is the rule. If I don't have it done, well, that's too bad. I need to get it done. If I have writer's block, well, that's too bad. Get over it.
Get over it.
I have written stories.
Let me rudely interrupt for one more quick comment, and I'm sorry I'm interrupting so much. I followed the advice of Harlan Ellison, who said, if you want to learn to be a writer, write a short story a week. At the end of a year, you'll have 53 of them. So I did that. Now, I only did it for 9 months, but I eventually sold every single story I wrote in that time. Okay. The way to do it is just to do it. Buckle yourself into your writer's chair and turn off all distractions and get off social media.
Yep.
Yeah, I recall a particular story I had, and I'm not going to say it because I'm going to criticize my own story, and I want the readers who dislike it to decide on their own if they think it's bad. So, because in all seriousness, authors often get wrong what they think is good and what the reader thinks is good. So, just because something is a
Amen to that. Amen to that.
Just because something is a particular favorite of mine. I even mentioned this to a friend of mine. I said it was my least favorite story, and he was shocked. He said I was very moved by it. I said, I'm pleased you said that, but I'm like, this thing was a struggle. It was a particular story where I had the idea like months in advance, and it was in my head a cool idea. It involved, and then I sat down to write it, and I could not think of an ending. And I struggled with this. I had conversations with Ben about it. We went back and forth brainstorming.
Several.
We went to our third right. What was that?
Several conversations.
Yes. We have a third writer in our circle, Ken Dickinson. We went to him and we asked him for advice. We could not think of an ending. Finally, the story was due. So I just wrote and then it resolved basically. Really the only way I knew. I even I remember Ken saying something to me. He's like, I'm curious. This ending seems very abrupt. Like, what's going on here? And I said to him, but what you don't understand is that I had no idea how to end it. So that's why it's ended like this.
This week, I rewatched the Disney classic Robin Hood with my eldest son, and it's the one where Robin Hood is a fox and King John is a cowardly lion. Yeah. And the ending is the narrator, Alan Adale, who's a rooster, simply says, and then when King Richard returned, everything was set straight. And I'm like, what? That's really the ending? Everything was set straight? That's your ending?
Yeah, it was something like that, unfortunately. I had a little bit more than just, and then it ended, but it was not satisfying. I knew it wasn't satisfying, but I couldn't think of an ending. But the story was done. The story was submitted. The story was out there, and then I can get moving on the next one. And somebody did tell me, I brought this up, and they said, I'm surprised you said that. I found it very moving. I was gratified to hear that. I told them I thank you for telling me this, but I'm like, in my head, I'm like, no, that wasn't a good story.
The problem is writers can't tell. We're like the magician who's on stage. When we set up our illusions for the audience, we know where the mirrors are and where the wires are, and we know what effect we're trying to get and what we don't. So when the audience sees all the cards drop out of our hands and fly across the room and they cheer because they think that looks really good, well, okay, the customer's always right. What can I say? I found out that C.S. Lewis's favorite story of his, the one he liked the best, is the writing of his that I like the least.
Which is what?
I'm not going to say. It'll start an argument. We don't have time.
I was just going to start an argument by saying, did Mark Twain ever write a good ending?
Oh, that's
Recollections of Joan of Arc.
Oh, yeah. I just read that this summer, too, and that is brilliant. Yeah, you're right. Why didn't I think of that? I just finished reading that.
Of course, that's because the ending was kind of written for him, but either way, it's satisfying.
One of the most satisfying endings I have ever seen of all satisfying endings was Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, where Sam says he's home. That's just that's just a perfect ending.
I was going to say earlier that I watched the final episode of the Freddy Krueger movies and went off and wrote my own ending for that, too. When you were talking about the Star Wars movies, but I never published it. I never did anything with it, but I was just so disappointed in the way it ended that I had to go off and write my own.
When I was young, I saw a movie called Dirty Harry and Crazy Mary, which was a heist film about a guy with a fast car that could outrun the police cars. And they rob a bank, and there's a big chase scene. And the director later said the reason why they made the movies, they had cars that the studio was done with, and they were going to junk. They wanted to crash the cars on camera to get some money out of it. So at the end of the movie, the bad guys have gotten away with the money, and the writer did not did not want them to get away. So the car is speeding down the road, and then Deus Ex Machina, a train comes out of nowhere and runs them over, and there's an explosion, and they die. The end. And I thought to myself,
Wow.
I said to my young self, you should remember this when you're a 60-year-old man, because this is the worst ending you've ever seen. And I said, I'm sure I'm going to see a worse ending from at some point. Maybe the third Matrix movie will be worse.
So,
my young self said, no, this is gonna be the topper. Hit with a train out of nowhere. Deus Ex Machina. So,
For the sake of
You have
trivia,
dredged up
do you know
an
which film? Oh, sorry, go ahead. Which film has the most car crashes of any film ever? Do you know?
I don't know that. No, I don't know.
Blues Brothers.
I should have known,
Set
because
the record.
they wreck dozens of cars just in one scene, and they do it over and over again.
Yeah.
Yep. Carrie Fisher
So
also does
you have-
a great cameo in that story as the jilted lover.
You have dredged up an old, embarrassing memory of mine that is related to.
Well, let's
what
hear
you-
it.
No,
I hope it's not
yeah,
that you're a fan of Dirty Mary and Crazy Larry.
No, not at all. So there was a video game I played years ago. I do enjoy video games. The game was called BioShock Infinite. BioShock Infinite is a fine enough game. It's okay, but it was very story heavy, and the story. I can say this in retrospect, and Ben might disagree with me even, but I will argue this. I'll. This is.
We have argued this.
Yes. I will go out on a limb and argue this. I think the story in BioShock Infinite is simply terrible, but specifically, it didn't need to be terrible. It's the ending that's terrible. The end of BioShock Infinite is, first off, ludicrously convoluted. But the best I can summarize it is that there are multiple parallel universes with all identical people, and nothing matters, and the daughter of the main character needs to commit patricide, not infanticide.
And
Patricide
suicide by proxy.
Yes, of all versions of her father in all parallel universes, all need to commit patricide. And
Sorry.
then to wipe out that whole section of the timeline. But then, just as a final twist of the knife, you wake up at the end and you hear a baby crying, and it ends before you learn who the baby is or how this happened.
Oh my
And this is
gosh.
never explained. I was so angry at the end of the story that I immediately wrote an absolutely terrible piece of fan fiction based on BioShock Infinite, where I wrote in a new ending. You can actually find it. It's like on fanfiction.net or something. It's still public. I haven't removed it for some reason. It's out there. There were like 3 comments on it that I ever got. One was like one person saying, "Good, I liked it." One I don't remember. And one was someone who said, "Bro, that's terrible." And I responded like, "This is terrible." And I responded to him and said, "I know." He like wrote, "Bro, that's that was his whole review, like, "Bro, this is terrible." And I wrote, "Yeah, I know."
I wonder how many ancient and well-respected authors are writing angry fanfics. We're going to find out that Virgil was really angry at Homer for something he did in the Iliad. The Odyssey. So he was going to write the Aeneid and show him how to do it better, or something like that.
I will say this: my terrible ending was still better than the video games version. So in that very limited sense, I was successful in my goal.
I
And with that,
I think a lot of authors, I'm not kidding. One reason why C.S. Lewis wrote the Planetary Trilogy was in response to and in rebuke to H.G. Wells's Time Machine stories and First Men on the Moon. He even has the same spherical spaceship and an industrialist and a scientist going to the other planet and and talking to the Supreme Lunar, who in the Lewis version is an Eldil, is an angelic being, and the Time Machine is very similar to the voyage to Purulendra, to Venus, except it's going into the utopia in the future rather than utopia in the past. And you find out there's more going on than you think there is. And the character, when he comes back to Earth, has flower petals with him, the same way the time traveler has flower petals in his pocket in H.G. Wells. But in the Wells version, he's sick and tired, and in the Lewis version, he's energized and healthy, and he thinks the humans are sick and tired because he's been to paradise and they haven't, it's an argument, and the Childhood's End by Arthur C. Clarke was based on a letter between Clarke and Lewis, arguing about space and transcendence, and Clarke was trying to say that exploration to outer space and scientific progress generally would satisfy the needs that Lewis is looking for spiritually, and so that Childhood Ends was Clarke answering Lewis, and Lewis was answering Wells. You see, that's how things get written.
Brilliant.
So we will end the stream with this. The original goal of the stream, which we were very open about, was to try and get, number one, enough attention for so that Mr. Wright can get onto Pints with Aquinas. We have tagged the Pints with Aquinas team on Twitter with this video, and we'll try and badger him with it, because and the reason is that Mr. Wright was mentioned by Matt Fradd's assistant Thursday in the middle of a very long live stream, and in a complimentary way. Second is to celebrate that Father Wetta will actually be on Pints with Aquinas. So congratulations, Father.
You're now officially famous, Father.
Yeah.
When will you be on the show?
That's why
by
I
the way?
became a monk, was specifically to become famous.
Of
Sorry?
course, it's an honorable approach for any monk or hermit to seek worldly fame and the rewards of the Prince of the Earth. Of course,
God has
the
a
point
sense
of
of
it.
humor.
What's that? Sorry?
God has a sense of humor.
Yeah.
But when will you be on Pints with Aquinas?
You know, I don't know. I just got an email from them telling me I was supposed to be on October 19th, but then I'm supposed to be at EWTN on October 19th. So I've got to call them back and find another date. So who knows? It may never happen. I may never become famous.
It's sad.
You might end up on TV, but you won't have the fame of Pints with Aquinas, and that's what really matters. Make sure you mention, and the third reason is so that Ben and I could sell ourselves the Pints with Aquinas. Matt Fradd, you should interview us. We're very nice, and we're smart, and I'm Catholic at least. And Ben, if you want to argue with Ben about something, he'll oblige if you really want to, and then you could get drama for your show. So it'll all work out.
Well, once Matt Fradd and I become besties, I'll make sure he gets everybody on the show. Maybe all four of us together.
Obviously, you need to go on. You need to give a good word to your very good and wonderful friends who are big fans of yours, Anthony.
Well,
and
you
Ben,
gave me my first big break, right? So,
yeah, that's it. Exactly. So you're wonderful and kind and probably handsome. You wouldn't know since we don't show our faces.
Yeah,
friends, Ben and Anthony.
Well, I picked an icon that looks almost exactly like me.
So did I.
Yes, I can see that. Are we talking about the horse or the rider?
Oh, nice one. Okay,
Sorry.
I earned that with the pig alien comment.
I needed something to confess next week also. So.
Perfect.
And so I just noticed my brother commented on the chat. My brother almost never comments, and he says BioShock Infinite was playing with fire because they were playing with alternate timelines. I suppose that is true. That's always a risky way of
in this continuum, yes, but in the world next door, I disagree, and I think the opposite.
Now you've robbed it of drama.
Because of course, that's what happens with multiverses.
Maybe
the only reason why any scientist or philosopher loves the idea of a multiverse is to get away from creation, is to get away from God. Okay, I'm sorry.
Right. Well, it was Stephen Hawking's was the thing. It was like, God doesn't exist, and yet this universe we live in is infinitely improbable. Therefore, there must be an infinite number of universes, or else this one wouldn't exist.
How do you determine the probability of something of which there's only one sample? Don't you need 100 to get a percent by definition? Doesn't that what the word percent means?
I never thought of it that way, but that's a good
First symptom.
point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Well,
so-
what is it? Saint Augustine said that what would have been equals infinite potentiality. Therefore, if you have an infinite number of alternatives, the alternatives are all impossible because you never get to them.
If you
Which is
believe in
fine,
the
but mathematically, the ratio between 1 and infinity is nothing. There's no ratio.
Right.
No matter how improbable things are, the fact that you exist or I exist is even more improbable because I might have not.
Do either of you have anything to add before we sign off? Any last comments to make?
God bless us, everyone.
God bless us and keep us.
Ben, do you have are you still alive? Do you have anything to say?
I yet live and breathe and must experience the suffering and torment of this life, as we all do. No, this has been a great stream, if I say so myself. Part of the problem with people jumping in on alternate universe fiction is that they think it's licensed to do whatever they want. The problem is that it is not. And your story will fall apart faster than Marvel's movie plans if you do not handle it correctly. And I am certainly happy to toast marshmallows while it burns.
I did see a cartoon where Owlman, the evil version of Batman from a parallel universe from Earth 3, wanted to destroy all the parallel universes because once you find out that there's infinite parallel universes, no other decision matters but the ability to destroy all of them. And I kind of agreed with him because infinite parallel universes make a mockery of everything. Larry Niven, the author of Ringworld, wrote an essay on this and also wrote a short story called All the Myriad Ways. Both the essay and the short story appear in his anthology, which is called All the Myriad Ways. I'll type the name into the chat since we're leaving.
Is the Ringworld? Did they just come out with like a movie version of that on like Netflix or something?
I used to follow science fiction movies so closely, but I've lost all track because they've just been so bad lately. They've just been so terrible. I don't even know.
Well, Robert McKee says that every time that there's a technological advance in filmmaking, the quality of the scripts goes down because people are just satisfied with seeing the new CGI or whatever it is. So
look, I like the special effects of Doctor Who back when it was Tom Baker. I'm okay with anything.
I do know the Over the Garden Wall guy is producing a series on a couple of the Redwall books by Brian Jacks. And I'm scared. It's for Netflix. In any case, thank you both for coming in. Matt Fradd, Senpai, please notice us. I swear I'm much more entertaining when I am not surrounded by Catholics like a toddler in a single mother household surrounded by 3 pit bulls. You can certainly.
I'm sorry.